Antwerp taught me that diamonds are patient. Vienna taught me that glass is honest. A wine glass looks delicate, but it tells on you. Lipstick, saliva rings, the lazy half-moon where a thumb gets comfortable. You dust, you fume, the story blooms. Except tonight, the glass refused to speak. The surface did. The victim was a venture lawyer named Henry Arden, a regular at a private tasting club tucked behind the Philharmonic. He died 3 sips into a Merlot that wasn't cheap and wasn't innocent. The stemware was pristine, polished like a violin, and the rim was scrubbed clean by someone who knew their way around a bar rag. No fingerprints, no smudges, nothing. A junior tech fetched a flashlight to mourn the lack of evidence and stopped moving. In the bowl of the glass, on the liquid skin, floated a rainbow sheen, so thin it was almost imaginary, patterned with ridges in looping ovals. A fingerprint the glass didn't own. A fingerprint the wine did. You don't build a case on a miracle. You build it on how miracles are faked, and on the parts the faker forgot to plan for. We're going to photograph a fingerprint that shouldn't exist, reconstruct the way a bare thumb met a poison no one planned to taste, and follow a supply chain for capsules that were never meant for medicine. We won't invoke ghosts. We'll invoke surface tension, gelatin bloom, and a chef who knew that gloves protect glass but do nothing to keep your oils off the one thing that moves. If you like your detection with clean lines and dirty motives, come closer. The wine is still. The ridges won't last. Neither will whoever left them. The Red Ledger tasting room hid behind a brass-handled door off the Philharmonic's back alley, the sort of private club that pretended to be a supply closet from the street and an orchestra from the inside. Soft lamps, a piano with the lid closed to keep the sound down, the soft hum of old money considering tannins. On a wet Thursday, Detective Sarah Lynn stepped in and felt every conversation fold in on itself like a soufflé going tired. The maitre d' was waiting just past the threshold, face framed in regret. "Detective, I'm Lydia Crane. We called within minutes, Mr. Arden." Her voice clipped itself, as if it had walked up to a cliff edge and chosen not to look down. He fell. He had done more than fall. Henry Arden, venture lawyer, donor plaque on the Philharmonic's mezzanine, the kind of man who made gratitude letters seem like invoices, sat slumped in a leather wingback at a round table built for 4. 1 glass, 1 plate, 1 folded napkin. The napkin was linen and white. The glass caught the room's warm light as if it had been rehearsing. His head, heavy with what happens when breath fails, lay at an angle that made the veins in his neck look like shuttered blinds. "Time?" Lynn asked. 21:06 we called, Lydia said. "The paramedics were here fast. They said he was gone." She looked past Lynn at the table, wringing the stem of her own wrist with 2 fingers. The paramedics had done what they could and then what they must. A blanket draped Arden's torso, neat as a closing argument. Owen Reed from Forensic Tech knelt at the table like a churchgoer, a ring of LED light in his hand making constellations out of dust. A crime scene photographer hovered, waiting on instruction that no one had yet had the breath to give. Lynn stood to the side of the chair and took in the arrangement like a conductor mapping a score. Bordeaux crystal on a coaster, a small plate smeared with dark chocolate, a fork resting tines down, a tasting menu printed on vellum with somebody's idea of old type. No spray of broken glass, no ash, no theatrical mess. Just a tableau that looked like an advertisement for the end of Appetite. "You're certain he didn't choke?" Lynn asked without looking up. "Airway clear," Reed said, the words drifting up from the floor. "No obstruction. EMS tried naloxone, no change. They're thinking poison." He didn't say it loud, and he didn't say it like television. Reed never did. He spoke like a lab, measured and unafraid of silence. Lynn leaned in. The glass was 2/3 empty. Call it 60 milliliters left, the bowl broad and generous, the rim so clean it could have cut silk. The room smelled like cedar and cardamom and money. From the dead man there was a faintness, a suggestion rather than a statement. Almond, shy and out of place. She put that word in a notional box and closed the lid. Almond. Cyanide liked to flirt with the idea of almond. The first deceit in such rooms was always fragrance. "Hands," Lynn said. Reed held his up through the blue powder-like glow. "Gloved." Same for everyone passing the threshold. We've bagged the trash bins by the service pass and the bar, as you asked. Staff. Wearing nitrile in the kitchen, Lydia said, quick to be helpful. In the tasting room, we don't wear gloves with service, it's a gauche. But we train on stems only. No one touches the bowl. Not once it's polished. Who polished this? Lynn asked. Nora, Lydia said. Our busser. Where is Nora? In the back, Lydia said. Shaking. Lynn let her be shaking for now. The glass had its own story to tell faster than most people did. She bent without touching and examined the base. No smudges. The stem, perfectly clear. If someone at the Red Ledger could polish a conscience as well as they polished crystal, she thought they would have put her out of a job. Arden's last movements? Lynn said. He arrived at 2028, Lydia said. He has had a standing Thursday, 1 glass of Merlot, a small pairing. He greeted Mr. Nyman on his way in, and he was alone. Who poured? Lynn asked. Victor Grieg, Lydia said. Our sommelier. He's in the kitchen speaking with officers now. Lynn nodded and eased the tasting menu up with a gloved fingertip off the tablecloth. 3 reds circled with pencil, neat little check marks, a lawyer's checks, decisive. Next to the Merlot was written, in a crisp hand, 3rd sip balanced. The irony was the kind that took all the music out of the word. Owen, Lynn said, walk me through what I have to not breathe on. Reed's LED light moved like a bee deciding which flowers to trust. No latent prints on the stem, bowl, or base, he said. I ran basic cyanoacrylate at the bar for practice. Nothing. The sink at the bar shows a hot rinse. The steel's heat marked from recently scalding glassware. If anybody touched the glass before the pour, they did it right. Polish, glove, stem. You can see the lint halos if you squint. Anything odd? Lynn asked. Reed hesitated, which meant yes. He kept the hesitation small, which meant he wasn't sure he wanted his own voice to hear it yet. The surface of the wine, he said. There's, detective, I need you to look without exhaling. He raised the LED ring and shifted its angle until the bowl of the glass became a dark mirror, a curve of night with a wine-dark planet at its base. On that planet, there was a sheen in miniature, the oil-slick iridescence you get when the world is thinner than a thought. The sheen wasn't uniform. It had edges, loops, ridges. Lynn leaned closer, breath held like currency. I see it, she said. She did more than see it. It looked like a whirl pressed into a skin of water, a galaxy of ridges and valleys that glimmered and withdrew as Reed rotated the light. The pattern sat at the air, liquid line, and drifted, not sinking, not breaking, only thinking about it. A film, Lynn said. Lipidaceous would be my bet, Reed said. Skin oils. Something floated at the surface tension and didn't want to go. You can get that with contact. Finger, Lynn said. Thumb, Reed said, after a second that admitted the word into the room. Size, ridge curvature. And left or right I won't hazard yet. But it's, detective, it's a print. Not on the glass. On the wine. They both let the absurdity take a seat, and then they ignored it like it had said something impolite. Lynn kept her breath shallow. How stable? Not long, Reed said. Depends on ABV, room temp, air currents. But it won't be there tomorrow. Nothing is, Lynn said. Then practical. We need images. Macro, high frame rate, cross-polarized. Lock the room vents. Seal the glass when you're done photographing. No one walks within 3 feet. Reed was already nodding, the LED moving through a curriculum of angles. I can drag the macro kit in from the truck. Cross-pole, oblique LED. High shutter, shallow incidence to kill specular glare. We'll find the ridges in the rainbow. Get it, Lynn said. He rose to go and looked back at the wine as if it might grow legs and walk off. Detective. Yes, Lynn said. We'll need a cloche, he said. Something to keep air movement down between frames. Tell Lydia to fetch you the prettiest cake cover in the place. Lydia, to her credit, was faster than grief. She darted away and returned with a glass dome fit for a royal tart. Reed settled it over the Bordeaux bowl as if blessing it. The world inside the dome slowed, stabilized. The sheen's loops gleamed in miniature green, purple, ghost blue, like street oil in a pothole at night. Who else touched this table after the pour? Lynn asked, eyes still on the glass. Lydia recounted it like a service ballet. Nora polishes the glassware before floor opens. Victor pours. I present. The kitchen pass is just there. She gestured towards the wide rectangular aperture that connected the tasting room to the kitchen's bright noise. Pastry sent a chocolate pairing to Mr. Arden a minute before Chef Leo Brandt runs pastry. Does pastry ever reach into the dining room? Lynn asked. No, Lydia said. We hand off at the pass. Tonight. She hesitated. I was greeting a small party at the door. Victor was speaking with 2 donors. For a minute, maybe less, Mr. Arden's glass was unattended. Who saw what from the piano? Lynn asked. The pianist in the corner, young and careful, had been hitting chords soft enough to feel pricey. Alice, Lydia said. She's a conservatory student. She said, she's shaky, but she said she saw a hand. Lydia swallowed. Come from the pass. Into the room. Just touch the glass. The wine. One motion. Lynn turned finally to look directly at the pass. Stainless steel counter, heat lamps, plates lined like a parade. The aperture gave a chef's eye view of the room. You could reach through it with a left hand, brush a tabletop, be back at your station before anyone had chosen a cheese. In the kitchen, voices rose and fell under the clatter of diligence. The pastry corner was a universe apart. Sugar, precision, the hum of a tempering machine. A broad-shouldered man in a chef's jacket was handing a tray of petit fours to a runner with the economy of someone who believed in tight radii. His left hand flicked, always the left, the right occupied with a knife that never quite left his palm. Leo Brandt, Lydia said, seeing Lynn's gaze. Left-handed. Best hands in Antwerp when it comes to chocolate. Not Antwerp, Lynn said. And don't promote him in the middle of my crime scene. She let the room become a set of concentric responsibilities again. Nora first. Nora Hale, the busser, stood near a service station with a linen apron in both fists. She was younger than the job liked to pretend. 20 maybe, and had the look of somebody who had polished one glass too many in her life. I used the hot rinse, she said to Lynn's questions. Then a clean towel, then a polished towel. You hold the glass by the base and the bowl with the cloth. Not with your hand. Always the stem or with cloth. If you touch the bowl, you see it under the lights. Smears. She said smears like a child says monsters. Personal and known. You polish Arden's glass? Lynn said. Yes. Then it goes to the bar. The bar sink is hot, Lynn said. You rinsed recently. Yes, Nora said. We scald before service. And after. Wear gloves. Lynn asked. In the kitchen. Not here, Nora said, and looked ashamed, as if the room's niceties had turned into a sin. Gloves or not, you'd leave prints on the bowl if you touched it bare, Lynn said. But you didn't. Nora shook her head. No, detective, I didn't. Victor Grieg, the sommelier, was the professional calm that money paid for. He wore nitrile gloves black as piano keys, and he did not remove them when he spoke to Lynn. House rule, he explained. The oils from a finger will mark crystal worse than anything short of a lemon peel. I decant. I pour. I hold the stem between 2 fingers. The only thing my glove touches is glass, and then only the stem. You poured Arden's Merlot, Lynn said. Yes. From what? Lynn asked. A half bottle uncorked at table. Fresh cork, Victor said. I can show you the cork if you... We have the cork, Reed called from his hemisphere of light. Bagged. No smell. Whose idea the chocolate pairing? Lynn asked. Chef Brandt's program, Victor said. It's a little theater. He sends chocolate buttons to accent certain notes. People like to feel indulged. Did he send one to Arden tonight? Lynn said. Yes, Victor said. A dark button. I didn't see it arrive. I was talking to Mr. and Mrs. Nyman. So the glass sat alone for a minute while attention went to donors and doors. In that minute, a hand, left or right, reached through a rectangle of space and touched not glass but wine. A cave painting of a thumbprint then sailed the surface like a tiny raft with a secret under it. "Detective," Reed said. "Macro set." The club had dimmed its lamps under Lydia's hand, leaving the table in a controlled dusk accented by Reed's arrays. He had positioned 2 LED panels at shallow angles, each wearing a cross-polarizing filter. He placed the matched analyzer over the macro lens, rotated until glare went to sleep. The cloche lifted, the camera inhaled, the cloche descended. The sound was not loud. It was the polite click of a door closing in a house of careful neighbors. 20 frames bracketing polarization, Reed said, as if discussing weather. Then an oblique sweep and a focus stack. Lynn watched the small screen fill with a planet skinned in oil and pattern. The ridges brightened, crisped, hopped into relief when polarizers crossed in the right mutual disdain. Reed moved through his routine without drama, a scientist at altar call. In between frames, Lynn took the club apart the way a mind looks at a map. Who could reach? Who had reason to? Who understood that gloves save glass but not surface? When Reed was done, he sealed the glass under the cloche and taped the base to the tablecloth with patient, tidy strips. From his case, he took a bell-jar transport dome with a locking base, something the lab had shelled out for after a previous experiment had learned to walk in a headwind. "Cloche is a good start," he said, echoing her earlier word. "But for transport, I'll use this. Negative pressure, minimal turbulence." "Do it," Lynn said. He slid the jar over the glass, turned the locking ring until it whispered assent. The little world inside now belonged to them and to time. "Detective Lynn?" A uniform had drifted near. "ME's preliminary says lividity consistent with sitting, no trauma. And there's that thing." "Almond," Lynn said. He nodded. "Faint. The techs are holding their breath." "Hold it a bit longer," Lynn said. "We'll run a cyanide screen on the wine. We'll run it fast." She looked back at Henry Arden the way you look at a name on a door you've just closed. The lawyer had put his pen down neatly before he died. It lay parallel to the menu's edge. She wondered if he'd known. If the almond had been a last kindness or a last joke. People tell you about cyanide smell like it's a rule. It isn't. Rules in her line of work were mostly the ones you make and the ones you test. When Reed sealed the jar and had the photograph secured, Lynn drew a slow breath and let it out through her teeth. She found Lydia again. "We're going to need your staff in one room and patient," she said. "No phones. We'll ask for prints, left and right thumbs at minimum, for exclusion. And I'll need your purchase logs for the kitchen, especially pastry." "Of course," Lydia said. "Detective, is there—" "Did we?" "You polished a glass," Lynn said. "Someone else polished an idea. We'll find them." From the kitchen pass, a laugh rose and died. The wrong noise at the wrong time. Lynn didn't look over. She went to the pianist instead. Alice sat with her hands flat on her skirt, as if the keys had suddenly developed teeth. "You saw a hand," Lynn said, gentle because gentle gets remembered. "A left hand," Alice said, not looking up. "I think, from the pass. It reached, with fingers together, not like picking up a glass, like pushing a button. Touch, press, gone." "Gloves?" Lynn asked. "I didn't see," Alice said. "It was quick, but there was a shine. And then there were colors on the wine I hadn't seen before, like when the river at home takes the gas from the boats." "Thank you," Lynn said. "Stay nearby. You did well." Reed drifted over with the small thrill he reserved for brand new puzzles. "Lab's on standby," he said quietly. "And I took a quick swab from the bar sink. The steel is still radiating from a scald. Someone cares a lot about clean glass." "Clean glass," Lynn said. Eyes on the jar where the liquid held its stolen fingerprint like a whisper. "And a dirty thumb." "Your call on order of operations," Reed said. "We keep the room calm," Lynn said. "You get your images. We bag and transport the glass under the dome. We lock kitchen supplies. We treat the pass like a suspect. And then we ask the left-handed chef about his right to touch anything that isn't his. Reed nodded and went back to his instruments. Outside the jar, the room resumed the pretense of being a place for leisure. Inside, the surface tension held on to its insult with the stubbornness of physics. The sommelier stood like a fixed point. The maitre d' kept her people from coming apart. The busser tried not to cry and failed. Lynn kept her notebook shut. There would be time for lines later, dates, times, small nouns that become big ones. For now there was only this: a glass that did not speak, and a surface that did. A man who had been alive and now was a lesson. A room full of hands, and one thumb that forgot what water remembers. She looked at the transport dome one last time before it left her sight with Reed's careful hands. If it floats, she said, soft to herself, to the job, to the next hour. We photograph it. The jar's latch clicked. The anomaly waited, caught between a camera and the future. The lab van idled in the alley like a careful animal breathing through its mouth. Owen Reed worked the cargo doors with his hip and came back into the red ledger pushing a stainless trolley whose top was a small city of clamps, rails, lens hoods, fiber-optic goosenecks, and a camera that looked as if it judged fashion. He set the trolley at a respectful distance from the transport dome and let the room reassemble around his intent. "Air off?" he asked. "HVAC is cut," Lydia reported. "We're on emergency lights to keep the amperage quiet." "Good," Reed said. He lifted the dome's locking ring half a turn, listened to the jar exhale like a teapot giving up. "Detective, with your leave." Sarah Lynn stepped closer and nodded. The club had been reduced to two camps, the curious and the responsible. The curious stood at the bar with their grief in cocktail posture. The responsible stood near the piano and tried not to be the reasons air moved. Reed replaced the cake cloche with a taller bell jar that sat on a rubber gasket base. Through a side port, he slid a Y-shaped manifold carrying two small charcoal scrubbers and a plenum tube. "Passive bleed," he explained. "Keeps convective eddies down between shots." "Speak to me like I'm a jury, Owen," Lynn said. "Less wind," Reed translated. "Better pictures." He set the Bordeaux glass on a black acrylic platform bordered by a white distance scale, the way surveyors keep 1 foot in math. Two LED panels took up positions at opposing shallow angles. Each wore a linear polarizing sheet at 45 degrees. On the camera's macro lens, he spun on a matching analyzer. When he twisted the ring, the reflections on the wine skin dilated and receded like pupils. He grinned, not for joy but because the world was going to cooperate and had the decency to show it early. "Cross-polarization cancels glare from specular surfaces," he said, angling one of the panels until the rainbow film stopped looking like a weather report and started looking like ridge topography. "The lipid film has birefringent behavior. It lights differently than the wine underneath." "English?" Lynn prompted again, a half-smile taking the sting out. "The oil floats and gives me contrast," Reed said. "The light shows me the ridges. The filter blocks the shine." He ran a focus rail under the camera, a micrometer crank that moved the lens in tastes of millimeters. He took a test burst, click, 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 each exposure a thin slice of depth. On the back screen, the ridges appeared as fine, interlaced silver threads limned by the polarized light. The detail was good enough to argue with. "Oblique at 20 degrees, he said to himself, slid a fiber optic toward the bowl, feathered the angle until the surface relief stopped blinding and started confessing. Frame 1 through 20 polarizer bracket, then a sweep of incidence, then a high frame rate series to cut through capillary noise. He didn't sprint. Reed never did. He was methodical to the point of comfort, a metronome in a world of improvisers. The bell jar came off for seconds at a time, then resumed its guardianship. Between bursts, he rotated the analyzer and watched the rainbow wash turn into map contours. The room's noises compressed to small mechanics. A clamp snicking, a filter sliding in a channel, the quiet mutter of the scrubbers earning their keep. "Detective," Reed said without looking up. "We'll need a control. Someone with clean hands touches a new glass of the same wine. 5 seconds, low pressure. We capture the behavior matched to room conditions." "Lydia," Lin said.
Pour à fraîche glace.
No service contact with the bowl. Find me a volunteer who can follow directions and doesn't moisturize for a living. The pianist, Alice, half lifted a hand and let it fall. Victor the sommelier stood too still. Nora stared at her apron. In the kitchen pass, hands kept working from muscle memory. Lin chose a uniform, Officer Prieto, because unpredictability with juries is better saved for closing arguments. Hands, Lin said. Prieto washed, dried, held them up. Reed inspected them the way a guitar maker listens to wood. No bomb. Good. They set a second Bordeaux glass on a twin platform. Prieto touched the wine as if initiating a truce. Thumb to the surface, a soft press, a little twist, off. The oil raft bloomed into being, a patchy oval with ridged devils curling around the thumb pad. Under polarized light, the film's loops brightened like thin frost under moon. Reed shot his sequence again. Control captured, he said. We'll compare ridge frequency, how close together, how thick, and decay time. Decay time, Lin said. He tapped a tiny probe that rode the bell jar's inner wall like a leech with a job. Thermistor. Room is hovering at 20.2 Celsius. At this ABV 13.5 surface tension behaves kindly. But the ridge clarity falls off as the oils spread, as microevaporation changes the skin. We keep shooting every minute for the first 10, then every 5. We'll get a persistence curve. He set a timer on his watch. Minute by minute, he took a frame, a ritual of small carefulness. As they watched, the control print softened, ridges feathering, loops losing their arrogance. The original, the one that was not a rehearsal, held stubbornly, as if the thumb that made it had pressed a fraction harder or brought more oil to the conversation. The window on scene wasn't large, Reed said. Whoever touched did it not long before consumption. How not long? Lin asked. Call it 15 to 40 minutes depending on turbulence, he said. We'll narrow it with the curve. But it's not hours. Good, Lin said. She did some short arithmetic with the timeline Lydia had spoken and the pianist's button press. Minutes sat down in a row and began behaving. Now for the part that makes the Daubert judge reach for a pen, Reed said. He produced a thin wafer of translucent silicone in a frame the size of a postage stamp. PDMS microfilm. Think of it as very gentle scotch tape for oil films. We lay it over, let van der Waals do what romance novels promise, and lift the lipid crest. Then we stain for contrast in the lab if we have to. Will it disturb the sample? Lin asked. Less than talking at it, he said. But we'll photograph first, then lift once. He ran one more bracket of shots. Click, click, click. Then slid the film on a micromanipulator arm so that the silicone kissed the wine surface and lay down on it like a leaf choosing a pond. The room held its breath as if the little square were sleeping. Reed waited 5 seconds, then peeled the PDMS up. On its face, the faintest suggestion of loops caught the light. Caught, he said, satisfaction in the geometry of the word. He docked the film in a clear slide with a pressure window and sealed the edges with a ring of nail-thin vacuum grease. We'll do the chemistry back at the lab, he said. Dyes, oil profile, and all the love letters hidden in lipids. But the lift is clean. What about left versus right? Lin asked, eyes on the ridge flow. The print picks up as it lies, Reed said. But we're at a mirror. The bowl reflects, the film inverts. We'll unmirror in software. Reverse the left-right, model the wave stretch you see at the edges. That ripple there, that's capillary action. We can correct for it by tracking the same microbubbles across frames. Treat them as fiducials. English, Lin said again, because she wanted to hear him make the promise twice. We'll fix the mirror problem and the tiny distortions, Reed said. The end print will be usable. Thumb 12 plus minutiae, enough to feed AFIS or at least to compare against a suspect set. The suspect set was not abstract. In the kitchen, Chef Leo Brandt's left hand flashed while his right hand held court over a paring knife, trimming chocolate curls that looked like something you'd leave a lover in lieu of a letter. He had the habit of those who make delicate things of looking as if he could break any of them when necessary. Detective Lin, a new voice said, It was one of the uniforms from the alley, carrying 2 of the lab's courier kits with the expression of a man honored to be a porter. Cyanide strips? Bring them, Lynn said. Reed opened a small vial from the trolley that wore warning diamonds like jewelry. We'll do this in a fume hood back at home, he said. But a spot test on a microsample will move the needle tonight. He withdrew with a borosilicate pipette, a tear of wine from the meniscus opposite the ridge raft, spun it onto a porcelain spot plate the size of a chess pawn's base. He added a pinhead of reagent. The color shift was not dramatic. It never was. The wine remembered its job and tried to stay wine. But something underneath argued pale yellow in a voice Reed knew too well. Positive screen, Reed said. Potassium cyanide would do it. We'll confirm with GCMS. He capped the pipette, labeled 3 things at once with a handwriting that made pharmacists jealous, and went back to the bell jar. One more thing while we have the lights and the patients, he said. I want a deep focus stack for morphology. 30 slices. Rail step at 30 microns. Take it, Lynn said. It was the easiest permission she'd granted in weeks. The camera crawled forward slice by slice as if it were a cautious animal testing a pond's ice. On the screen, the ridges clarified until they might have been cream ice on a dark river. Lynn watched, an old sensation reaching up her spine. The feeling that the world had made a trick and she was learning where the false bottom was nailed in. He killed the lights. They came back slow like a good apology. Transport, Reed said. He relighted the bell jar, spun the ring, and seated the assembly into a shock cradle with foam that remembered the shape of every glass it loved. He strapped the cradle to the trolley, signed his own chain of custody card, handed the second line to Lynn. She signed. Lydia initialed because she understood that law is paperwork wearing clothes. Kitchen purchases, Lynn said to Lydia, especially pastry. Last 2 weeks. Lydia had them. The Red Ledger was the kind of place that could lay its hands on invoices faster than some people found their heartbeat. Lynn flipped to pastry and found the usual sugar, cocoa, cream, and the less usual. Gastrolab, 2 days prior. Gelatin sheets, 225 bloom. The kind of strength number chefs used the way detectives use times. Also, empty gelatin capsules. Clear, size 0. A line item that belonged to supplements, not sweets. Why capsules? Lynn asked aloud, nobody in particular. Confectioners sometimes make liqueur pearls, Victor said from his corner. Novelty. Liquid center. Thin shell. Do we serve novelty? Lynn asked, still not looking at him. Only when it pays, Victor said, and had the decency to look at the floor. Lynn handed the folder back. Secure the pastry station, she said. They walked the pass together, a small procession that smelled of vanilla and anxiety. Chef Brandt raised his right hand like a surgeon interrupted. Detective, he said, I've spoken to your colleagues. A tragedy. Your left hand reaches far, Lynn said. His mouth twitched, a nearly smile that didn't want witnesses. I plate with my left. The pass is built for right-handers. Life adapts. Behind him, Nora hovered as if she had remembered something and was letting it grow teeth before speaking. Lynn held up a palm in truce. One at a time, she said. Reed stayed at the trolley, inventorying the lift slide as if loss could smell the act. He tucked the PDMS film into a protective wallet that would survive a flood or a brawl. Beside it, he set the spot plate into a sealed container with a desiccant pack. A separate sleeve took a second lift he had made from the wine's opposite side. A blank to prove the absence of pattern. Controls and cases, Reed's catechism lay down in order. Detective, he called softly. Under dye we'll see more. Dye, Lynn said. Cur blue or Nile red, he said. Lipids sing under the right stains. And if there's anything particulate embedded in the film, shreds from an encapsulant, for instance, we'll know. Encapsulant, Lynn repeated, tasting the weight of the word. She could see it now. A capsule thinner than courtesy, made to dissolve in a mouth or in wine. A thing that gloves would mock and a thumb would command. A left-handed press, a twist, a release. Surface tension as conspirator, not witness. Reed's timer chirped. He took the last of the persistence frames and shut down the lights. On the control glass, the ridges had gone from sentence to rumor. On the original, they were paler but legible, the loops still inked in oil. He marked time. 27 minutes since they'd started shooting. Call it a half hour since the touch. Detective Lynn, Lydia said, stepping back from the kitchen door with a plastic tub in her hands as if holding a newborn. From pastry, their trash for the last 2 hours. Lynn popped the lid. Inside lay Candyland evidence. Acetate sheets with cocoa ghosts, little plastic pipettes, torn parchment, and, tucked to one side like a secret kept by a lazy liar, a capsule tray, the kind used to hold empty gel caps while you filled them. One cavity had a dried blush at its rim. Not red, not wine exactly, but wine's memory. Bag it, Lynn said. Reed obliged, swabbing the cavity and the tray body. He ran a handheld meter over a sachet in the same tub. Desiccant, he said, and then, after a beat, trace, iron complex. We'll put real names on it later. Lynn looked at Chef Brandt's face when he saw the tray go into a bag. It didn't change. People talk about guilty looks as if they're cheap. In the rooms where Lynn worked, guilt had learned early on to freeze its face into good manners. Detective, Reed said at last, beginning the pack-up. We have a usable right thumb latent with 12+ minutiae once unmirrored. The persistence curve sets a window. Cyanide screen is positive. And I'll bet you tomorrow's coffee we find gelatin shreds embedded in the film under dye. Keep your coffee, Lynn said. Save me the proof. He smiled very slightly. Always. She followed the trolley to the alley and watched the van swallow the cradle with the care of a mother animal accepting a new scent. Paperwork spoke to paperwork by way of signatures. Reed shut the doors and pointed his chin at the sky. We'll start analysis on arrival, he said. He didn't say when she could expect results. Lynn didn't ask. Time would be measured in frames and stain baths now, not in hours and impatience. Back inside, she walked the room once more, taking its pulse with her eyes. Arden's chair had been vacated to a gurney and then to the street. The table sat like a confession that had been interrupted by a phone call. On the pass, Chef Brandt piped a line of ganache on something that would make a donor forgive an insult. His left hand steadied the plate. His right hand did the flourish. On his left thumb, barely. When he reached just so, Lynn saw a thin pale V of scar that ran across a ridgeline like a poorly erased pencil mark. Photograph his hands, she said to a uniform. Both. High res. Brandt looked up. Is this necessary? He asked, voice warm as tempered chocolate. It's considerate, Lynn said. She stood finally at the piano, where Alice sat as if each key might announce something she wasn't ready to hear. You play, Lynn said. On Thursdays, Alice said. Mostly standards. They like not to be surprised. Tonight there will be surprises, Lynn said. Thank you for noticing a hand when it pretended to be a ghost. Alice nodded. It wasn't a ghost, she said. It was a cook. Lynn left her a small smile as payment for the line. Then she put the room back into the hands of uniforms and managers and walked out into the alley where the van no longer idled. On her phone, the message from the me ticked in. Asterisk lividity consistent with seated death. No petechiae. No gastric contents out of place. Blood drawn for tox. Will prioritize cyanide panel. Asterisk. Lynn typed back. Asterisk we're ahead of you. Wine positive on screen. Expect gelatin in bowl. Will advise. Asterisk. When she went back in, Reed had left nothing behind but the promise of an image made legal. The Bordeaux glass's absence was louder than its presence had been. Lynn stood by the empty black platform and pictured the ridges the way a cartographer looks at coasts in the dark. You don't build a case on a miracle, she reminded herself. You build it on the way a miracle behaves when you don't clap. Tonight the clap would be in a courtroom months from now, when a judge leaned in and a jury stopped pretending boredom. Between here and there stretched a litany of frames, stains, spectra, curves, and the human habit of underestimating water. Detective, Lydia said. Tentative. What do we do about service? You close, Lynn said. You take care of your people. and you don't touch the pass. She headed for the kitchen, where the air felt a degree warmer and the tension a degree cooler. Chef Brandt, she said. Yes, detective, he said, looking up from a line of chocolate buttons that matched perfectly, a feat that in another hour would have impressed her. Left-handed. I am, he said, since birth and to the misery of every schoolteacher I had. She nodded. We'll be back with warrants. In the meantime, don't leave. I have a dessert course to finish for no one, he said, and his smile was a cut that didn't bleed. Lynn met Reed again only in imagination, in the lab's light where the PDMS film would go under dyes with names that sounded friendly. Under those dyes, the film would confess not only ridges but contaminants. The tiny transparent fringes left by a gelatin wall tearing, the microcrystals that a crude conversion path might shed, the scent signature of a hand bomb trying to be winter. In the interim, her job tightened. Opportunity, access, motive. She had a left hand that liked to reach through a rectangle of air. She had capsules in a trash tub and a purchase log that read like a recipe for audacity. She had a thumbprint not on a glass but on a surface that moved. She also had a timeline to crush into a minute and a half. The minute and a half in which theater became murder and a thumb wrote its name on a liquid no one thought would keep a guestbook. 3 more interviews, she said to herself, making a list she'd never write down. 2 more locks. 1 arrest that needs to wait until photographs learn to speak. Behind her, the piano finally found a chord. It hung there, a low C, the sound of a room breathing in through its teeth. Then the note dissolved, politely, into the night. The lab's intake corridor smelled the way clean glass would smell if it had a voice. Faint ethanol, ammonia gone to college, a vanilla thread from nitrile. Reed rolled the cradle into imaging bay 2 and clicked its wheels into the floor locks. Behind the safety line, Sarah Lynn stood with a clipboard she didn't need, watching a glass bell that now felt like a clock. Chain of custody intact, Reed said, and the recorder on the wall agreed in its soft, court-friendly murmur. He lifted the dome with the deliberation of a watchmaker. The Bordeaux bowl was unchanged except for time's minor cruelty. The rainbow raft of oil had paled, but ridges still ran in brave loops like handwriting after rain. A lab chemist named Quan joined them, slim behind a visor, gloved in a color that was pretending not to be blue. You have your photographs, she said to Reed. So I get my sip. Opposite side of the raft, Reed said. We're not stirring a martini. Quan nodded. She drew a microaliquot with a glass capillary, dispensed it to a porcelain spot and ran a cyanide screening reagent that reacted as if bored. A tired yellow, the kind that makes juries lean in. She peeled a strip from a container that looked like an expensive breath mint tin, wetted it with the wine, and watched it creep to a pale chartreuse. Positive on screen, she said, writing while she spoke. We'll send the remainder to GCMS. If there's potassium, we'll know. If there's anything else bathing with it, we'll know that too. Lynn watched the raft. I want whatever's in that film, she said. If there's structure, shreds, grit, anything an encapsulant would shed. Reed held up the PDMS lift he'd taken at the scene. Under the bay's raking light, the silicone film was faintly opaline, the ridge pattern like a frost ghost. He mounted it under a cover slip and handed it to Quan, who slid it onto a stage that had more axes than a lumberjack's nightmare. They dyed the second lift. A spare Reed had taken in case bravery failed, with Nile red, a stain lipids adored. Under fluorescence, the world went quiet in a way that wasn't silence but attention. The loops lit up as if someone had drawn them with a steady hand and a glowing pen. Between ridges, at ragged little deltas where the lines split and rejoined, tiny clear scabs clung to the film. Quan rotated the polarization and zoomed. There, she said, edges with dye uptake. Not protein, not plant fiber. Looks like. She did not finish it with guesswork. She cut a corner from the stained PDMS and teased one shard free with a tungsten needle as thin as reluctance. The shard went to a micro FTIR. The spectrum returned with a signature that made her shoulders ease. Gelatin, she said. Strong amide bands. High bloom by the looks. The spectrum has that tightness. We'll call it around 220 or 225. 225, Lynn repeated. The purchase log in Lydia's tub had red gelatin sheets, 225 bloom. Words lining up with numbers had the good taste to be reassuring. Origin. Edible, Quan said. Confectioner grade. Your pastry man's pantry isn't a stranger to it. Reed had kept shooting between instruments, his macro rail humming its small distances, his polarizer ring turning patience into data. Ridge directionality shows a press, twist, release, he said, narrating the morphology the way a flight recorder narrates a crash. Pressure dimples here and here, see the flat-topped ridges? Then a shear in the loop arc clockwise for a left thumb reaching from the pass, counterclockwise if it were a right hand. Our witness called a left reach. Lynn looked again at the loops, at how they opened like the cross-section of a nautilus and then kinked where force met friction. So somebody didn't just touch, she said. They did something. Quan lifted her visor. A thin gelatin capsule dissolves slowly in wine, she said. ABV, acidity, temperature, flow, all that matters. If you want it to rupture quickly, you can either drop it from height, which leaves splash and spectacle, or you can press to break the surface tension and stress the wall. Oils don't mind riding the interface. They're happy to announce their arrival. Gloves give you nothing to float. Why bare thumb? Lynn said, half to herself. Grip, Reed said. And the print is a side effect, the way footprints are a side effect of walking. Quan nodded once. If someone wanted to accelerate dissolution at the air-liquid interface specifically, she said, this, she tapped the raft's glowing map with a gloved fingernail, is the signature you'd expect. Press, twist, release. The twist tears a capsule seam. Your Nile red is lighting up little shucks, like onion skin, caught between ridges. In the GC-MS Bay, a tech wheeled over a cart with a small drama queen of an instrument humming on top. They split the remaining wine into two. One for cyanide quant and anions, one to search for companions, bombs, benzoates, anything the hand had donated. Intakes chuffed. Chromatograms walked onto screens like parade floats. Potassium cyanide, strong major, the tox tech called. Trace benzaldehyde, expected from wine and cyanide's chemistry. And the second screen bloomed with a sharp peak. Wintergreen, the tech said, reading a library match. Methyl salicylate, not common in wine. Very common in hand bombs with marketing teams. Reed smiled without teeth. Chef Station had a bomb jar. Label looked like a snowboard company designed it. We collected it, Lynn said. It'll be in the evidence locker by now. Good, Quan said, because oil profiles are petty and proud. The raft's lipid mix will be skin sebum plus whatever the thumb had on it. If Brandt had wintergreen on his hands, the film ought to echo it. Lynn texted the property room. Expedite Brandt hand bomb to lab. Request comparative GC-MS to methyl salicylate profile from raft. The reply came back with the bureaucratic equivalent of a nod. Reed adjusted the macro rail and took a long, slow focus stack that turned the raft into a topographic model of someone's guilt. On the monitor, the ridges marched. The bifurcations sat like crow's feet at the corners of a very specific eye. At one point a ridge broke in a shallow V and resumed, a little valley that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with scar tissue. Mark that, Lynn said. Index the V-scar. Chef Brandt's left thumb wore one like a haircut mistake. Reed placed a digital pin on the map and tagged it. V ridge break, distal pad, sector delta 2. He was fussy with names in a way that soothed judges and irritated defense attorneys. Interface concentration will matter, Quan said, paging through an old article in a newer binder. Cyanide equilibrates quickly, but agitation and collapse at the surface spikes local exposure. A press at the surface right before sipping would drive higher microdoses into the first layer that touches the lip and tongue. So the first sips kill faster, Lynn said. Short onset, Quan said. 3 to 5 minutes for collapse isn't unusual at lethal concentrations. Lynn's timeline narrowed like a lens. Chocolate pairing at 2046. A reach within the next 92 seconds.
Sip at 20 oras 49 minuto.
Collapse at 2053. The numbers sat in a row, tidy as place settings. She stepped back from the bench and let the lab do what labs do best: grind. While the GCMS ran its course, Reed did something that looked like magic and was only math. Mirror correction, he said. He fed the image stack and the control sequence into a program whose window had too many sliders. We track microbubbles as fiducials. They drift, but they're consistent across frames. That gives us the capillary flow field. We invert the field, reverse left-right, and we get a true geometry. On screen, the loops flipped as if deciding to tell the truth. The V-scar moved to where a left thumb scar would live. The ridge endings reasserted their spacing. Reed overlaid a transparent grid whose squares were smaller than the letter O in a paperback. Minutiae grew flags. Ridge endings, bifurcations, short ridges with no ambition. 12, then 14, then 16. Usable latent, he said softly. Left thumb. I'll print the map and we'll run lab to suspect when we have exemplars. Exemplars we will have, Lynn said. He can offer them, or we can ask a judge to ask him for them. Quan, who preferred instruments to arguments, leaned in with tweezers and dropped another PDMS shaving into a micro FTIR. More gelatin, she said. This one shows wine dye uptake at the edges. That means the capsule wall tore in situ and stained at the seam, not in a pre-soak. And the capsule wall was thin, Reed added, because the film's shreds are small and consistent. A confectioner trying to make a liqueur pearl you could pop with the tongue would choose thin. Size? Lynn asked. Hard to say from shards, Quan said. But your trash tub tray was for size 0. If that's the tray, then Brandt either makes novelty vitamins for donors, Lynn said, or he brought those for a different novelty. Reed shot the raft again for persistence data. The curve was kind. At room temp, ridges kept their character for half an hour, readable for a touch more if you were generous. The control he made in the club drooped faster, the lab's air being a little less pretentious than the red ledgers. He marked the timestamps and drafted a paragraph in his head to explain it to a judge who collected fountain pens. Detective, the tox tech called, your anion panel. Lynn crossed the bay. On a small screen, peaks wore labels like uniforms at a dull party. Cyanide present and rude. Potassium smiling beside it. Trace ferrocyanide. Asterisk ferry asterisk not ferro. The less dangerous caged cousin, insulted by acid. Ferrocyanide, Quan said, reading over Lynn's shoulder. Food safe in its salt. Mirror glazes use it for a trick. You drop the pH and add heat and, well... She opened her hands as if releasing a bird. You can coax the cage to open. Lynn thought of the kitchen pass, of citric acid in squeeze bottles and a heat lamp glowing over chocolate work like an interrogation. She thought of a beaker in a trash tub with blue sorrow at its bottom. She thought of Chef Brandt's bookmarks, which she did not yet have but could already picture. Blue prussiate hazards, citric plus heat equals breath. Source is pastry, she said. Route is acidified ferrocyanide under heat. Delivery is gelatin capsule, ruptured at the surface by a bare left thumb. Signature is the oil raft with a V-scar and wintergreen in its ghost. Proving novelty is our problem, Reed said. Liquid latent fingerprints aren't common in case law. But ridge skin is ridge skin, substrate be damned. We have controls, replication, and correction. And the gel traces are frosting. Quan looked up from her notebook. We should do a blind, she said. 5 volunteers. Left thumbs, same wine, press twist release. Lift and run all prints through the pipeline without names. Does the system call the volunteers and your unknown apart? It will make the validation section sing. Do it, Lynn said. Put it in the appendix and print it big. While the volunteers were being fetched from labs that love to be helpful, Lynn took a call from the me. The voice on the other end spoke in the register of facts. Arterial blood-free cyanide is elevated, detective. Stomach has wine with the same conversation. No gastric hemorrhage. Classic picture. Thank you, Lynn said. We'll be providing a chemistry route for your notebook. She hung up and looked through the glass wall toward evidence receiving, where a small jar of hand bomb had arrived in a bag with a label that said Leo Brandt, Party Station. Even through plastic, the wintergreen made a polite suggestion. Quan teased a smear into a vial and fed it into the GCMS. The peak it sang was a match made for prosecutors. Reed brought over a printout of the unmirrored ridge map. He had marked the V-scar, 3 bifurcations unique enough to make a fingerprint examiner clear their throat, and a cluster of ridge endings near the distal pad that looked like teeth in a pocket knife. 14 points of minutiae is the old myth, he said. Courts accept fewer if the quality is high. Ours are clean. He laid a transparency over the map with a faintly comic reverence. When we get Brandt's inked left thumb, we'll overlay. If it sings, it sings. Lynn nodded. It will sing. She stood for a moment and let the sum settle. The thought she had in the club had been right in shape if not yet in color. Gloves protect glass, but nothing in a kitchen protects the one thing that moves. A thumb met a surface. The surface remembered. Quan glanced at the clock. Your persistence curve gives you a time of touch, she said. 15 to 40 minutes before image capture at scene. Back out Reed's timeline and you pin your hand in a small window. 92 seconds, Lynn said. Between pairing and sip. We'll fit a whole life into them. Reed began packing the glass again, giving the raft one last look that was half affection, half ownership. Next step. 2 forks, Lynn said. You keep doing the science until the science becomes English. I go talk to a left-handed chef about capsules that came with his invoices and a scar that came with his choices. She signed the lab forms, dated the times with the precision of someone who has been told too often that minutes don't matter. At the door, she paused. Owen, she said. Detective. You said earlier you'd bet coffee on finding gelatin shreds embedded in the film. He nodded at the fluorescence monitor, where the Nile red had made little feathers sing. Keep your money, he said. I'm buying anyway. Lynn smiled without being seen. Then she was gone, out into a corridor that knew her shoes, and the lab returned to its hum. Lynn had identity, mechanism, and a narrowing window now she needed access. Who had both the capsules and the chance to touch Arden's glass in that 92-second theater between pastry and sip. Service, like crime, runs on choreography. Sarah Lynn spent the next afternoon turning the Red Ledger's dance into steps a jury could march to. Walk me through a pour from nothing to sip, she said in the empty tasting room. Lydia Crane stood at the pass as if about to conduct. Victor Grieg the sommelier arranged bottles with the solemnity of a rite, and Nora Hale clutched 2 linen cloths like life preservers. Doors open at 20, Lydia said. At 1945, Nora scald rinses and polishes. At 1955, Victor builds the station, decant, corkscrew, clean glasses. At service, a guest is seated. A glass appears. A pour is made at table. I present. Paths, Lynn said. Who moves where with the glass? They walked it. Nora lifted a crystal Bordeaux from the rack with cloth-wrapped fingers, steam ghosting off the bowl. I dry with one cloth, polish with the other, she said. Basin left, bowl in right with the fabric between my skin and the glass. I carry it by the base to the bar. Never the bowl? Lynn asked. Not bare, Nora said, affronted by the thought. If I slip, it goes back for a rinse. Victor demonstrated his part with a neutral glass. I place the polished stem in the service cradle, he said, a padded slot cut into the bar. Bottle to the right, cork cut, collar cleaned. I hold the glass by the stem. 2-finger pinch, pour against the far wall to minimize agitation. Present. Lydia stepped in. I take the stem at the foot, she said, sliding a fingertip under the base's edge. I adjust the table a 1/4 inch to the guest's right. If there's a pairing, it arrives on a saucer to the left. No one barehands the bowl, Lynn said and watched the nods. She circled the room, then pointed at the pass. An aperture 3 feet high and 6 wide, stainless counter flush to the room. The kitchen glowed beyond, a diorama of steel and white. During service, where are you relative to Mr. Arden's table? Opposite side, Lydia said. The pass is behind him. I was greeting a party at the door when pastry called the pairing. Victor, Lynn said. 2 donors stopped me near the bar, he said. I answered questions about vintages I did not feel like selling. Nora, resetting a foretop, Nora said, eyes on the floor. I saw Chef Brandt put a dish on the pass. I heard him say Arden. Then I looked away. Lynn stood at Arden's table, now dressed only in tape markers and absence. She crouched, traced the path from pass to rim in the air with her hand. A left arm coming through the pass, she said, would approach the glass from the kitchen side. Hand position for a press. Victor came around reluctantly, then surrendered to the physics. Like this, he said, reaching with his left, palm down, thumb cocked, pressing as if muting a drum. You don't grip, you touch and go. That motion leaves a left thumb print, Lynn said, or a right if the person contorts, but contortion leaves tells. Our prints twist and shear said natural. She met Brandt an hour later at a bare metal table in interview 2. He wore street clothes with the insincere casualness of a chef out of habitat. T-shirt, jeans, a watch scar on his wrist where the kitchen's rules had unbuckled for a day. You run pairing theater, Lynn said. Chocolate buttons to match notes. I do, he said. People like a sweet ending. 2 days before Arden died, you received a shipment from Gastrolab, Lynn continued, sliding a photocopy of invoices across. Gelatin sheets, 225 bloom. Clear gelatin capsules, size 0. Why do you order capsules, chef? Confectioner practice, he said, unbothered. Liquor pearls. Thin shells. A joke in the mouth. Funny joke, Lynn said. You fill them with what? Liqueurs, he said. A mark if I'm feeling kind. Kirsch for cherries. A Fernet if I want to punish someone in a charming way. You filled any on Thursday? No, he said. The tray was in the trash because I broke one during mice. I threw it away. The cavity with the blush, Lynn said. We swabbed it. The blush was wine dye. A lot of dye passes through my station, he said, almost patient. Fruit purees, reductions. Ferrocyanide, Lynn said. The word tilted his face a millimeter. Food safe in its cage. Blue tricks for mirror glazes. You order from Chemicote. There's a beaker in your trash with blue residue. The pH in that beaker was 2.5. Under heat and acid, ferrocyanide can release. Detective, he said, polite with the ends of his teeth. You'll need a chemist for that lecture. I brought 2, Lynn said. They'll be in court. He looked past her at the two-way mirror, saw only himself, considered whether to admire what he saw. He rested his elbows on the table. Mr. Arden died, he said. Terrible. The Philharmonic will miss his checks. Why did you try to ruin him? Lynn asked. Try, he said, tasting the verb. Is that what we're calling pastry now? Emails, Lynn said. From Mr. Arden to you, to Lydia, to the owner. Threats about food safety violations. Demands that you cater a private event without charge or heed. Move the city's eye to your station. He used phrases like clawback and career. He'd cost your pop-up a lease last winter by finding a clause and twisting it. Brandt smiled, small. He was a lawyer. He lawed. And you cooked, Lynn said. On Thursday at 2046, you sent a chocolate pairing to his table. The glass sat unattended for 92 seconds. In those 92 seconds, a left hand reached through the pass, pressed the wine surface with a bare thumb, and withdrew. We have a ridge map with a V-scar crossing the distal pad. Between ridges, we found gelatin shreds that took wine dye as they tore. In the raft of oil, we found methyl salicylate wintergreen that also lived in your hand balm. Your left thumb wears a V-scar. Your poetry, he said. Court likes prose. I like both, Lynn said. So I brought pictures. She laid down 2 prints. The unmirrored ridge map from the raft, annotated with flags. A high-resolution photograph of Brandt's left thumb, taken with him squinting against the flash on the kitchen line. The V was not dramatic, but it was not imaginary. It bisected 3 ridges with the confident indifference of an old kitchen knife's memory. He let his face remain bored, but his breath hitched twice small. We haven't asked for your prints yet, Lynn said. We will. A judge will ask for them if we ask nicely. We'll recreate your press with a control glass at your station with your hand and your bomb. We'll show that gloves protect glass but not surface. We'll show that your wintergreen sang where a man was drinking. But before that, tell me the part where you dressed a poison in a confectioner's costume. He leaned back, the chair giving a small aluminum complaint. You think I used cyanide? I know, Lynn said. I smell the almond in the autopsy room. The lab hears it in the peaks. The interface concentration is right for an onset at 4 minutes. You pressed the surface to rupture a gelatin capsule and to spike the skin where lips meet liquid. You didn't intend a splash show, because donors would notice. You intended a quiet catastrophe. You make me capable, he said. You made yourself, Lynn said. He looked at his hands, and for a second the room's mirrors seemed to be the only honest people present. Get me counsel, he said. If you believe your pictures, we can all look at them together. We will, Lynn said, and left him to the geometry of his options. Back in the tasting room, Lynn sat the 3 front-of-house down again and gave them the simple task that kills alibis. Tell me what you were doing for 92 seconds. Lydia ticked off arrivals and conversation beats. Victor quoted donors and vintages. Nora, eyes filmed, paused at a different memory. I heard a glove snap, she said, like when you change. From the kitchen. Then a glove fell in the bin behind the pass. I only noticed because it missed and slid down. I picked it up and put it in the bin. It was only one glove. Left or right? Lynn asked, heartbeat even. Left, Nora said. The fingers lay that way. She mimed the curl, the dumb evidence of anatomy. Bag the bin, Lynn told a uniform. Pull brand of gloves from pastry. Count the pairs. If one is short, I want to know. They rolled the tape on the Red Ledger's CCTV, a camera blind in the corner and the only eye in a room that imagined itself too good for eyes. The pass camera, not meant for detectives, meant for chefs to catch delays, caught the corner of Arden's table as a blurred rectangle and the glancing sheen of wine. Brandt's station stood in frame 2/3. At time code 20 hours 46 minutes and 41 seconds, a plate slid forward. At 20 hours 47 minutes and 9 seconds, a forearm with a chef's cuff entered frame from the kitchen side, left-handed by orientation. The hand never made the glass itself visible. It dipped below the counter's edge and back. At 20 hours 47 minutes and 12 seconds, Brandt pivoted, snapped his left hand as if shaking off water, turned his attention to a piping bag, right hand still gloved. In the thermal overhead, Lynn's team had bolted to the soffit months earlier, a sensor meant to track wastrel heat in kitchens for a different investigation. The wine bowl recorded a breath of cooling at the meniscus at 20 hours 47 minutes and 13 seconds, a subtle plume that radiated then died. Reed later would put words to it about evaporative flux and thin films. Lynn only marked the timestamp. Window proved, she said. She asked to see the trash from the pass bin laid out on butcher paper. Among the citrus rinds and parchment skeletons lay a single black nitrile glove, powderless, size medium. It had a sheen at the cuff and clean creases at the fingers from having been taken off in a hurry. His partner was not present. Photograph bag, Lynn said, and check the kitchen glove box. If there are 9 pairs and 1 single, count out loud. A patrol officer came back from the alley with a plastic drum they'd taken from the pastry drain trap. Blue gunk, he said, simple in his accuracy. The lab's quick and dirty iron test turned the smear a lively Prussian. Quan would do the rest. The story, cage broken under acid and heat, wasn't poetry. It was plumbing. At Lynn's request, the pianist returned to stand at her position, a silent witness with a better sight line than anyone realized at the time. Show me the hand again, Lynn said soft. Alice lifted her own left hand and brought it through the gap between room and kitchen. Thumb cocked, fingers together, a press into absence and up. Pressed like that, she said. No hesitation. Gloved? Lynn asked. Alice blinked, remembering not color but reflection. There was a little shine, she said. But I don't think so. Gloves don't shine right unless they're wet. This was skin. Lynn nodded. She'd already built that conclusion 3 different ways. It was good to have a musician play the same note. By the end of that shift, Lynn had taken more statements than relief. She wrote the service flow into a diagram. Polish pour present past pair unattended touch sip. She drew 3 arrows to the rim labeled Nora, cloth. Victor, glove, stem. Lydia, base. She drew 1 arrow to the surface from the pass, labeled left hand, bear. On the evidence table lay the capsule tray with its pinkish ring, the single left glove from the bin, the chemicode invoice, and a printout from Brandt's browser history supplied under warrant. A bookmarked thread called Blue Prussiate Hazards, a note in a phone app reading citric plus heat equals breath. Call that motive's cousin, methods rehearsal. When Lynn finally looked up from the page, she felt the click in her head that meant the mechanism and the movement had agreed to share the room. She was short one thing. Why a man as controlled as Leo Brandt would make a mess this clever and assume it wouldn't be mopped. Ego, Victor had said in an unguarded moment when she asked what chefs thought they could get away with, and the belief that technique is an alibi. Lynn knocked once on interview 2's door before re-entering. Brandt's counsel had arrived, sat with a legal pad that made him look fresh and old at once. "We'll be asking for your prints, chef," Lynn said. Seat pulled out but not sat in. "Left and right thumbs. We'll be asking for your bomb and your scar. We'll be asking a judge to admit a fingerprint that floats. He'll say yes because ridge skin is ridge skin. And we'll be back in your station with a camera to recreate the move you made." Brandt's counsel said, "We reserve our rights." As if rights were something that fell out of the air into good hands. "I'll bring you a tray," Lynn said, and let the door close. Brandt was left-handed. The pass gave him reach. His station held empty-size, 0 capsules and a bomb that smelled like winter. The choreography of service had 3 ways to touch a glass, and only 1 way to touch the wine. The warrant came down just after noon, printed on paper heavy enough to embarrass a menu. Sarah Lynn watched the ink dry, then watched 3 uniforms unlearn the notion that kitchens are sacrosanct. The red ledger had been closed since the night before. Its dining room smelled like dust daring to return. In pastry, the stainless tables had their arms crossed. "Locker bay?" Lynn asked. "Back corridor," Lydia said, counting keys from a ring like a rosary. Chefs keep their shoes and sins there. Chef lockers had always disappointed Lynn. Too much order where television promised chaos. Brandt's was no different, labeled L. Brandt in labelmaker font, the door polished by habit. Lydia turned the key and stepped back, palms open. Inside, a spare jacket folded with military gilt, a pair of clogs that had learned the map of his feet, a soft-sided toolbox with a zipper that moved like a suggestion, a cardboard sleeve with purchase receipts neatly accordioned, and a plastic Cambro with a taped lid labeled pearls. "Not for service," in a blocky hand. "Photograph, then remove," Lynn said. Gloves snapped, the sound of inevitability. A tech laid butcher paper and made the locker a diorama of a mind. The Cambro came first. Under the tape, not pearls but the means to make them. A capsule tray, the same model as the one in the trash, larger, cleaner, its grid labeled size 0. A handful of clear gelatin capsules nested in a zip bag, their hemispheres like dragonfly wings, 8 or 10 still married, others single and coy. At the bottom corner of the tray, 1 cavity showed a pinkish bruise, not vivid like candy, but the tired ring of wine dried thin. "Swab the blush," Lynn said, "and the interior lip." The tech obliged. Nearby, the soft-sided toolbox unzipped into a small religion of precision. Offset palette knives, a digital thermometer, a set of microbeakers with chalk blue ghosts in 3 of them, a pocket scale that still wore powdered sugar like a season, a cheap pH meter with dry droplets staining its cap. In a side pouch, a jar of hand balm that looked like toothpaste for soldiers. Matte tube, rugged font, wintergreen loud enough to sue for libel. "Bag the bomb," Lynn said, though she knew another jar already sang in the lab. "Desiccant." A tech held up a tiny sachet from the toolbox's bottom, the kind that warned "do not eat" in 16 languages. "Standard silica," he said, and then, after a portable probe sniffed it like a bloodhound, "trace cyanide. Quan will bless it or rebuke it later," Lynn said. "Keep it separate. New gloves between items." She thumbed through the purchase sleeve while the room's air pretended not to be indicted. Gastrolab invoices, 2 days before Arden's death, Gelatin sheets, 225 bloom, 2 kg. Gelatin capsules, size 0, clear, 1000 CT. PDMS casting kit. That one made her smile without joy. A chef who played with silicone molds might buy PDMS for harmless reasons, but the acronym had followed her from the lab this morning like a totem. Bloom number? A uniform asked, leaning in. Gelatin strength, Lynn said. The higher the bloom, the firmer the set. 225 is as proud as pastry gets without lying. Is that unusual? He asked. For mirror glazes and pearls? It's chosen, Lynn said. Detectives have 12 ways to say deliberate. Chefs use numbers. At the bottom of the sleeve lay a stapled sheaf. Brand emails about a pop-up bakery that had almost been and then hadn't. Bête noire. Temp lease agreement last winter. Termination PR clause 11. B. The week after counsel on the other side added a paragraph like a fishbone. Arden's firm letterhead rode the top right. The signature file at the bottom was his unlovely flourish. Someone, Brandt by the angle, by the impatience, had circled 11B with a grease pencil hard enough to bruise the paper. In the margin, clawback, and below that, career. Lynn slid the sheaf back into its sleeve without fuss. Motive comes in 2 colors, grief and ego. Contracts breed both in superfood quantities. Detective? The tech at the door said. Brandt's here. Counsel, too. Interview 3 had the same plastic chairs, the same soft two-way mirror, the same old table that had learned the weight of elbows. Brandt took his seat like a man approached by an inconvenient dessert. Resigned, a little offended, game. You keep tidy books, Lynn said. I keep a kitchen, he said. She placed the GastroLab invoice on the table with the gravity of a chess piece. Gelatin sheets, 225 bloom. Capsules, size 0. 2 days before Arden died. Why capsules, chef? He didn't blink. Practice runs, he said. If I ever bought a centrifuge and a sense of humor, I'd serve gels empty, capsules filled. The folly of texture. People post it. The Cambro labeled pearls. Not for service in your locker, Lynn said. Inside is a clean tray, capsules, and your bomb. One cavity carries a wine blush. The desiccant in your kit carries cyanide trace. Your toolbox holds beakers with blue residues. Your pH pen is stained by acidic solutions. And your invoices from Chemicote show ferrocyanide orders that don't belong to scones. You brought a chemist, he said. Be sure to let her earn overtime. I will, Lynn said. What I'm asking you is why a man who orders equipment to make the harmless version of a trick also orders every ingredient to make the darker one. He folded his hands, left thumb on top. The V-scar made a pale valley across the pad. His eyes flicked to the mirror and back. Because the line between darker and harmless is called skill, he said. And because I like knowing lines. She slid a glossy photo across. The ridge map from the raft, unmirrored, its flags pointing like small guilty bookmarks. Your left thumb has a V-shaped scar that interrupts 3 ridges. The film we lifted from Arden's wine shows a V-shaped ridge break in the same sector. The match will be in the report we'll hand your counsel. We'll validate left versus right, and we'll bore the judge with our controls. You can save your appetite for appeal. Your print, he said, glancing at the map, is from a soup. From a surface, Lynn said. Ridge skin is ridge skin. The substrate is novel. The pattern is not. He smiled. Court likes old things, detective. I've also brought old things, Lynn said, and laid a second sheet. A composite of 14 minutiae in common between the raft and Brandt's exemplar, which the judge had pried out of him an hour ago with the thin bar of a court order. Bifurcations flagged at Delta 1 and Delta 3. A ridge-ending cluster like teeth at the distal pad. The V-scar annotated with 2-point correspondences. Reed's draw was clean enough to frame. Brandt's counsel cleared his throat. We'll review and respond, he said, as if the evidence were a memo that had arrived late to a meeting. Respond all you like, Lynn said. Your client's bomb shows methyl salicylate. The raft shows it, too. His tray shows wine dye. The film's gelatin shreds carry it. His drain trap shows ferrocyanide's ghost. His beaker shows acid's memory. His station is the only one with a glove short of a pair. And he works with his left. Lots of people use wintergreen, the lawyer said. Not in rooms that promise money for tasting, Lynn said. Front of house is scentless by rule. Kitchens forgive lemon, garlic, smoke, butter. Wintergreen doesn't live there unless hands carry it in. Brandt let the silence sit. Then he tried on a shrug that didn't fit. Capsules for liqueur pearls, he said. Ferrocyanide for glaze effects. The rest is coincidence and creative writing. Creative writing, Lynn repeated. You mean asterisk blue prussiate hazards? Citric plus heat equals breath? Asterisk. Bookmarks pulled from your phone this morning by a warrant with a signature your lawyer also admired. Counsel inhaled to shape a word like suppression. Lynn didn't stop him. She liked to know the weather. We also have a photograph of your left glove still on at 2047 and your right glove off, Lynn said. A single left glove turned up in the bin. I changed in a hurry, Brandt said. Chocolate demands timing. The surface demanded you, Lynn said. He looked at her hands, the pen, the paper, and did the calculus smart people do when they decide whether to be braver or more afraid. Mr. Arden's firm, he said at last, not confessing, merely introducing a character, sent a letter last winter that stripped a 12-month lease down to a 1-month lie. My pop-up died because a man wanted a favor called compliance. He sent notes to my GM threatening to raise inspectors like hornets if I didn't cater his niece's birthday. He CC'd everyone you ever want not to be CC'd. He treated rooms like mine as rooms he owned. And so you taught him there are rooms even he couldn't own, Lynn said. His jaw worked, wounded pride chewing on what it couldn't digest. You speak like a judge, he said. I prefer ovens, she said. But they're taken. Back in pastry. Lynn stood with Reed over the Cambro labeled as if it were a joke. 225 Bloom, Reed said, looking at the sheet packet. He wanted a thin capsule wall that wouldn't break if you looked at it, but would tear if you asked. Shreds in the raft say he asked, Lynn said. They inventoried the rest of the locker with the boredom that keeps errors out. Spare nitrile, hair restraints, a notebook. The notebook had sketches of plated desserts, ratios of cocoa to cream written like spells, a margin where someone had written surface tension hates you less if you say please and drawn a smile. He practices, Reed said. He rehearsed, Lynn answered. On their way out, Lydia waited with a folder that had been half apology, half weapon. Mr. Arden's messages, she said. To me, to the owner, to Victor. He liked to remind us who signed the checks. On top, a line. I won't have my guests ingesting unscrutinized chemistry, followed 3 hours later by, Chef Brandt will cater a private evening gratis and unhindered, or I will ensure inspectors take a prolonged interest in his mise en place. There were uglier lines. None rose to the dignity of a threat clever enough to testify without help. Thank you, Lynn said. You run a room, Miss Crane. You did not run this. Lydia nodded once. A bow a person gives news they already had. The last stop was the corridor outside the staff restroom, where Brandt had washed his hands under a camera that knew none of them mattered before last night. The footage showed the automatic dispenser spitting foam into his left palm, his right still in a glove. Then the glove rolled off the left in a move practiced by surgeons and men too proud to stick labels on boxes. He rubbed wintergreen into his knuckles like a man trying to sand a thought down. He reached for a fresh glove and then thought better of it, called for a runner, and turned back toward pastry with one hand bare. Time stamp, Lynn asked. 20:46:58. The text said. Pairing called at 20:46:10. 92 seconds, less a breath. A clock that tempted arrogance. By evening, Lynn had the outline any prosecutor loves to recite. Means capsule and chemistry. Opportunity, the pass and the unattended glass. Identity, a left thumb's map. Motive, a contract and a man's appetite for humiliating experts. Consciousness of guilt, glove change, browser bookmarks, a Cambro labeled like a private joke. She also had a problem that could make all of it wobble. Novelty. Liquid latent fingerprints would ask a judge to like new music. Defense would hum the old tune about junk science, about mirages on wine, about reflections that lie. Reed would have to make a lecture out of patience. cross-polarization, focus stacks, PDMS lifts, mirror correction by fiducials, blind controls. Quan would have to make chemistry speak without Latin. Lin would have to make the jury feel how a thumb presses and how water remembers, not because a detective said so, but because the surface did. She stood alone in the tasting room one last time. The pass a dark rectangle now. The piano closed, the glassware suspended like planets in their racks. Her phone buzzed. A text from the me. Asterisk quant done. Cyanide lethal. Time to collapse fits. Asterisk another from Quan. Asterisk desiccant sachet. CN trace confirmed. Bomb, methyl salicylate matches raft profile. Asterisk and one from Reed. Asterisk mirror corrected minutiae overlay on Brandt's exemplar. 14 points, including V-scar bifurcation. Blind volunteers run started. Asterisk. Lynn wrote in her notebook, not because she needed to but because the act puts lines in your head. Asterisk no miracle, just oil. No ghost, just bloom. No accident, just reach. Asterisk she underlined reach once. When she closed the book, the room had sharpened. The choreography was down to one dancer and one move. She could charge, but she wouldn't rush. Not until the novelty learned to speak old, and the print that floated could be heard without translating. To win the room that mattered, the courtroom, Lynn would have to survive Daubert, replicate the liquid latent recovery, get blind controls to separate unknown from volunteers, and walk a jury through minutiae until the V-scar stopped being metaphor and became map. Courts do not love surprises. They love rehearsals. On Monday morning, the lab became a theater with the doors locked and the scripts written in calibration ink. Sarah Lynn stood behind a glass wall with a legal pad she would later translate into plain talk. Inside, Owen Reed drew grid lines over the ordinary. Protocol as written, he said, voice steady for the recorders. Replication of liquid latent fingerprint acquisition from wine surface. Substrate, Bordeaux crystal. Liquid, Merlot, 13.5% ABV, 20.2 degrees Celsius. Airflow minimized. Lighting, cross-polarized LEDs at shallow incidence. Camera, macro lens on micrometer rail. Capture set, polarization bracket, oblique sweep, focus stack, minute-by-minute persistence frames. 5 volunteers from other departments filed in: chemist, evidence clerk, admin from records, patrol liaison, lab intern. None with hands pampered enough to ruin a study. All consented, all coded by number. They were told a story without names and given the same move. Left thumb, press, twist, release on a fresh glass. 0.5 of a second contact, no lotion. Reed shot each in turn. On the monitor, 5 oil rafts appeared like small galaxies, each with its own ridge constellations, each lighting up under Nile red with a smugness that said lipids love attention. Quan ran the timer. A tech logged room temp. Another flagged any microbubbles in field to act as fiducials later. Controls locked, Reed said, and moved to the unknown. Arden's glass already photographed at scene and again in the lab. The PDMS lift under glass like a pressed flower from a poisonous garden. He ran the same pipeline. Mirror correction by tracking microbubble drift across frames. Reverse left-right to true geometry, capillary field inversion, focus stack to make the ridges march. He did not hurry. You do not hurry when novelty asks to be old. Quan stained the volunteer lifts with Nile red and whispered to the fluorescence unit. The ridges sang for everyone. The song was never the same twice. She shaved 3 microfragments from the unknown PDMS and fed them to micro-FTIR. Peaks answered in amide bands like a hymn. Gelatin again, consistent with high bloom. She smiled a little at the shape. Numbers have a way of recurring when the world is honest. Now the blindness, Reed said. He dumped the ridge maps, 5 controls and 1 unknown, into a folder only the computer would name. He stripped the labels, randomized the order, and ran the comparison engine he'd spent a year writing because sometimes budgets answer to obsession. The algorithm didn't guess. It tallied minutiae, ridge endings, bifurcations, enclosures, and calculated spatial relationships that would make a geometer proud. It spat out a dendrogram that clustered the 5 volunteers away from the unknown as if erecting a small fence. Unknown is an outlier, Reed said for the microphone. Not consistent with any of the 5 controls. Throw Brandt's print in, Lynn said, though she knew the choreography. Volunteers first, suspect later. But sometimes you give yourself the treat in the middle. We'll do it twice, Reed said, grinning with one corner. They inked Brandt's left thumb. The judge's order had made collection painless if not pleasant, and captured it on sensor in 1,000 dpi square, the ridges black, the scar a quiet valley. Reed unmirrored the unknown, aligned the grids, and hit overlap. On the screen, two transparencies found each other like a trick with cards. Flags appeared where ridge endings stood on each other's shoulders. Bifurcations kissed. The V-scar crossed the same trio of lines in both maps. 12 points. 14. 16 when Reed allowed a generous threshold for ridge drift. He dialed that threshold back to conservative. 14 remained, clean and insectors examiners would not argue about. Minushi match, he said, voice a notch softer. Left thumb. Unknown to Brandt. Concordant. Quan took the oil game further than pride. She swabbed the PDMS lift and the bomb jar from Brandt's station and sent both to GCMS. The chromatograms arrived like skyline silhouettes. Methyl salicylate, the wintergreen, stood as a sharp tower in both. Retention times a match that would satisfy even a defense expert who collected adjectives. Smaller peaks in the raft trace lanolin. A ghost of eucalyptus. Found siblings in the bomb. She ran a blank. It behaved. She ran a sommelier's glove. It sang only nitro, a different key entirely. Oil profile concordant, she said into her recorder. Unknown lift lipid composition consistent with Brandt hand bomb plus sebum components. Front of house items negative. Control volunteers negative for methyl salicylate under these conditions. Reed returned to persistence. He plotted ridge clarity, a quantified metric he'd built that gave numbers to what an examiner calls good and washed, against time for each volunteer. At 20 minutes, most controls held. At 30, they softened. At 40, they became rumor. The unknown's data, derived from the scene sequence, tracked a persistence curve whose age at capture back calculated to a time of touch 30-some minutes prior, plus or minus 5 given the vent cut and the dome. When he layered the tasting room timeline on top, pairing at 2046, sip at 2049, collapse at 2053, the math didn't creak. Time of touch window, he said, drawing a band across the graph, 15 to 40 minutes pre-imaging. Imaging commenced around 2120. That puts the touch between 2040 and 2105. Our service log gives a narrower opportunity, 2046 to 2048. Consistent. They didn't stop at pictures. Quan and a second chemist rebuilt the poison in a hood with the manic conservatism that keeps your eyebrows. They documented a conversion from food-safe ferrocyanide to free cyanide by acidifying with citric to pH 2 to 3 and holding under a heat lamp, the same wattage as pastries, to simulate kitchen conditions. A Draeger tube flirted, then spoke. An anion panel confirmed. A cyanide electrode, calibrating itself into truth, gave numbers no one could mistake. They ran blanks. Ferrocyanide alone under neutral pH, no release. Acid without ferrocyanide, no lie. Everything that sang had a reason. Everything that stayed quiet proved a point louder. Yield sufficient for lethal dose, Quan wrote, and Lynn could hear her already testifying without theater. Route plausible under tools and supplies found at Brandt's station. Reed could have stopped at one lift. He didn't. He built a gentle microsiphon with a PDMS edge to take a second. A third lift from the raft's opposite quadrants to demonstrate that the oil film was not a unique freak but a generalizable surface phenomenon. Each lift carried ridges where ridges ought to be. Each matched the geometry of the first after mirror correction. He archived one and never touched it again because you always leave something for the defense to break and fail. In the corner, a fingerprint examiner from the old school, white hair, voice like file folders, arrived on her own time as a favor to the craft. She looked at Reed's maps, at the overlays, at the raw shots with the rainbow shine. She took off her glasses and cleaned them, which Lynn had learned over years was what integrity looks like when it pretends to be fastidiousness. Substrate novel, the examiner said. Pattern not. You've corrected the mirror right, your fiducials are honest, your minutiae are what they say they are. I can testify to the comparison. I will not testify the method is routine. She glanced at Lin. You already know that, but you don't need routine. You need reliable, repeatable, relevant. You have it. Daubert, Lin asked. Survivable, the examiner said, and smiled at the word as if it wore armor. The blind test results printed. The algorithm had not once mistaken a volunteer for the unknown. Similarity scores stayed low across controls, high only where Brandt met his own ghost. Reed saved the outputs, printed them on paper heavy enough to thud pleasantly on council tables, and backed them up to a drive with a chain of custody form that did not care about adjectives. Quan carried over another page. Microscopy on the raft's shreds shows dye uptake at torn edges, she said. Wine dye clings there. That means the gelatin wall broke in situ at the surface, not pre-soaked. The shear marks align with your twist vector, clockwise for a left thumb from the pass. Good, Lin said. Directionality is the brick. The dye is the mortar. They wrote it all down in language jurors could take home. How to photograph a fingerprint on liquid with pictures. How to lift it with a film gentler than a breath. How to correct mirrors by tracking bubbles like breadcrumbs. How long it lasts, long enough to matter and short enough to time. How to match it by counting the places where lines begin, end, and bifurcate. How to smell it, wintergreen where wintergreen did not belong. How to break safe blue. E****, with acid and heat and arrogance. When the experiment tide went out, Reed and Quan stood with the habitual unease of people whose work is now paper. Lin felt the opposite. The steadiness of a narrative that no longer moved when you breathed on it. Walk it for me as if I'm 12 and the jury's 11, she said, one last rehearsal. Reed started at the beginning, and it sounded like a story and not a trick. Someone pressed a bare left thumb onto a still wine surface. Skin oils spread into a thin film that rode the surface tension like a raft, reproducing the thumb's ridges. We photographed those ridges with cross-polarized light and a macro focus stack to see through glare and ripples. We lifted the lipid film with a thin silicone called PDMS. Because the wine surface is a mirror, the image is left-right reversed and subtly stretched by capillary flow. We corrected both using stable microbubbles as landmarks. The resulting map shows more than a dozen ridge characteristics that match Chef Brandt's left thumb, including a distinctive V-shaped ridge break caused by a scar. Controls confirm we can do this on demand, and that the unknown print is not any of those controls. Quan took her verse. Chemically, the wine contains lethal cyanide. In the raft itself, embedded between ridges, are microshreds of gelatin consistent with a high bloom capsule wall. Those shreds show wine dye at torn edges, evidence the capsule broke at the surface. The raft's oil profile contains methyl salicylate and minor components that match a wintergreen hand bomb found at Chef Brandt's station. In his drain trap and beakers, we find ferrocyanide residues. We show in the lab that acidifying ferrocyanide under heat can produce free cyanide in quantities sufficient for a lethal dose. Timing derived from the raft's persistence and the service timeline puts the touch within a minute of the pairing and a few minutes before the sip. Lin nodded, satisfied and briefly grateful that physics, chemistry, and ego cooperate as often as they do. By mid-afternoon, a draft affidavit lay ready on Reed's bench, the kind of document that looks dull until it opens its mouth in court and swallows reasonable doubt whole. Lin read it for tone, clipped 2 adverbs, underlined repeatability and blind validation twice, and signed the line that let good science walk out into the weather. On her way back to the squad, she stopped at the evidence fridge to check the small jar labeled bomb. Brandt as if it might have changed its mind. It hadn't. Wintergreen still pressed a finger against the plastic like a mime. Next, Reed asked from the doorway, stripping gloves with the tidy guilt of a surgeon mid-shift. Source, Lin said. The poison's birth certificate. We have the route in theory and the residues in practice. I want the where and the how much. And I want to know when Chef Brandt learned enough chemistry to keep himself alive and someone else not. He nodded. We'll keep the instruments warm. She moved through the corridor toward the interview rooms with the slow impatience of someone who knows the last act has already been written. It just hasn't been read into the record. The cyanide's path had started in a catalog and walked through a prep list. Somewhere between those 2 lay an order number, a receipt, a forum post that had felt helpful at 2 a.m., a beaker that had been cleaned in a hurry and not well enough. Outside, The afternoon had the thin taste of metal rain. Lynn dialed a number she could recite half asleep. "Chemicote?" she said when the line picked up. "Detective Sarah Lynn, Major Crimes. I need purchase histories for the Red Ledger's account and any retail orders to a Leo Brandt in the last 60 days. Ferrocyanide products, amounts, shipping, payment. You can send counsel with it if you like. I'll bring a warrant either way." The voice on the other end was polite in the way commerce is when it smells subpoenas. "Of course, detective." She hung up and wrote 2 words at the top of the next page. "Where from?" Under it she added what yield and who advised. She drew a small square that stood for the pass, an arrow that stood for a thumb, and a circle that stood for the part of a glass where a life ends not because of a miracle but because of physics. With replication and minutiae in hand, Lynn's case could breathe in court. Now she had to close the supply chain. Find the cyanide's doorway, ferrocyanide bought, acid and heat applied, and the paper that proved the poison wasn't an accident in a kitchen that liked to pretend nothing ever was. The sales rep at Chemicote had the courteous panic of a man who'd been told to be helpful by someone who could afford lawyers. "We're a coatings and food finish supplier, detective," he said on speaker, paper whispering under his hand. "Edible mirror effects. Food-safe prussiate salts. Blue is popular. Weddings. Ferrocyanide," Sarah Lynn said. "Tell me who wanted it and how much." "We have a house account for the Red Ledger," he said. "Standing order on cocoa butter colors, titanium dioxide, transfer sheets, ferrocyanide, potassium ferrocyanide, food grade. Shows 2 orders in the last 6 months. One shipped 3 months ago, 250 grams. One shipped 6 days ago, 250 grams. Both signed for at receiving. And there's a retail order that looks personal. Leo Brandt, shipped to a locker pickup, paid by card. 100 grams. 12 days ago." He read the locker address, and Lynn recognized the chain that sold anonymity in brightly lit cubbies. "By card," she said. "Yes," he said. "I can provide the authorizations. Mask number, last 4, 8134. We record IPs on the web portal. This one resolves to a phone." "Send all of it," Lynn said. "Orders, shipping, MSDS, brochures. And your best employee ready to explain to a jury what food safe in the salt means and why salt stops meaning safe when you add acid and heat." He promised and hung up grateful. Quan, who had been listening at the edge of the lab bench with the contentment of a chemist hearing future exhibits being born, wrote 250G times 2 plus 100G in her notebook and underlined it. "More than enough," she said. "Even with sloppy conversion." Property brought up Brandt's wallet from the evidence locker. The card with the last 48134 was there, a debit from a credit union with a logo that wanted to be a mountain. Lynn photographed the front and back, signed for the privilege of looking, and gave it back to the cold metal drawer. "Locker pickup?" she said. A uniform fetched the log from the parcel center. The camera above the wall of cubbies showed Brandt in a baseball cap he thought made his face disappear, tapping a code with his right hand, his left in his jacket pocket. The box door popped. A small carton came out. He walked away without looking back, which is a way of looking back. Back at the Red Ledger, the receiving clerk, a man who loved manifests more than some people love family, recited the dates like anniversaries. "Chemicote box arrived Monday last," he said. "Signed by me. I don't open Chef Brandt's parcels. He's particular." "Where did it go?" Lynn asked. "To pastry," he said. He said, "My toys." In pastry, the shelf above Brandt's station had gaps that told stories to anyone who had ever shopped at a hardware store the day after building something they shouldn't. Quan climbed a step stool and dusted a rectangle of clean steel surrounded by dust that made an outline. "Box size matches Chemicote's small shipper," she said. On the opposite shelf, a row of squeeze bottles waited like well-behaved children. One was labeled citric in tape pen neatness. Lynn lifted it, watched the solution cling to the plastic like a remembered offense, and set it down for a swab. "Citric's no crime," Quan said, testing the pH out of habit. 2.3. That's a crime's friend. They pulled the pastry drain trap assembly, the same one a patrol officer had called blue gunk 2 nights ago, and let the lab put real names on the sludge. Quan teased the copper mesh out with tweezers and dissolved a fleck in clean water. A drop of iron test turned Prussian blue with the enthusiasm of a flag at a parade. Ferrocyanide residue, she said. And if any free cyanide ever lived here, it didn't survive the trap's history. But the cage lived, and Blue remembers. She took the mesh away like a trophy she refused to celebrate. Lynn worked the phones. Chemicote's compliance officer emailed PDFs with the alert alacrity of someone promised a subpoena. Brochures that used the words edible and mirror and safe more often than necessary. A safety sheet that warned in an italic no one ever read, do not acidify. The invoices had tracking numbers. The tracking numbers had signatures. The signatures were the clerk's careful block letters and Brandt's slanted initials. She printed the page with the italic warning and put it on top of the pile where a jury would see it first. They pulled Brandt's phone again, now under a broader warrant that made his counsel press his lips into a line, and walked through the search history his thumbs had written when the kitchen was empty. Blue prussiate hazards, acid plus Prussian blue, citric versus acetic pKa, heat lamp wattage. A note app page carried a line Lynn could hear as a closing argument. Citric plus heat equals breath. Below it, a grocery list, gloves, capsules, beakers, bomb, and then crossed out capsules. Consciousness of guilt, Reed murmured, peering over the note. And a timeline as a shopping list. Where do chefs learn chemistry? Lynn asked, more to the room than to the man watching her not say the word murder. In kitchens, Quan said, and online, and sometimes wrong. They checked the order from Gastrolab again. Along with the gelatin sheets and capsules was a PDMS casting kit. Reed smiled crooked. He meant food molds, he said, before Lynn could accuse him of having taught the devil a trick. Everyone uses PDMS to make little impressions. If defense suggests contamination because our lifts use silicone, we'll hold up this invoice and say join the club. The lab-grade PDMS lived in our bench. His lived in pastry. They won't meet. Lynn's board at the squad room fattened. She had 3 columns now, source, route, delivery. Under source she chalked Chemicote ×3 and locker 221 and card 8134. Under route she wrote citric 2.3 pH plus heat lamp and drew an arrow to beaker blue residue 2.5 pH and drain trap fairy. Under delivery she wrote size 0 capsule, press, twist, release, and taped up the photograph of the raft with the annotated V-scar because pictures win rooms, words can't. Motive wrote itself across the top margin in a hand nobody taught her. Arden's emails, food safety threats, free catering demands, Arden's winter letter eviscerating Elise. A man who practiced precision for a living learning that someone else's precision could erase him with a paragraph. Lynn visited the prep vendor down the block. The owner remembered Chef Brandt in the way stores remember good customers. Card on file, jokes at the register, orders that made sense and orders that didn't until they did. He bought citric in bulk last Tuesday, the owner said, producing the copy slip without a warrant because a detective's face is sometimes the only paperwork you need. And a heat lamp. He said his old one died. What wattage? Quan asked. 250, the owner said. The kind that makes desserts sweat if you stare. Same wattage as the one on the pass, Quan said softly, pleased by the comb's teeth lining up. They pulled kitchen trash from the day before the murder, day after. The line cooks were offended by the rummage on principle, then relieved when the gloves and labels made clear this was not about their sins. In pastries trash, a printout existed that should never have been printed in a room that sells mystery as hospitality. A forum thread with a headline Blue Tricks, Prussiate Pitfalls, someone with the handle Mirror Mage posting a stern paragraph about not taking shortcuts with acid, someone else named Tempers Are Fickle saying citric is gentler, and a third soul with the sense of a boulder saying gentle doesn't mean safe. At the bottom margin, in graphite, Brandt had written gentle and underlined it twice. You keep receipts? Lynn told the room later. The room was full of paper and mostly still, but sometimes the paper keeps you. By late afternoon, Chemicote's courier came by in a suit that made him look like a better person than his job required. He brought chain of custody for their end of the dance and a smile like a man hoping not to be a villain. We ship labeled, we include MSDS, he said. We tell buyers not to acidify near food. He held up the italic sheet as proof. We sell edible illusions. We can't help what kitchens do to them. You will help me say that under oath, Lin said. He would. Back at the lab, Quan and Reed did a cruelty called necessary. They reconstructed the conversion with the same model heat lamp as the pass, the same citric concentration, ferrocyanide at the same order of magnitude as the invoice weight would allow via kitchen scale error. They documented hydrogen cyanide release rates the way decent people document rainfall. The numbers weren't cinematic. They were enough to kill a man in 2 sips. The anion panel nodded. A nitrile electrode clenched. A Draeger tube marbled towards its endpoint like a polite noose. Yield matches seen, Quan said, spinning her chair toward Lin. No miracle. Just an ugly chemistry you can do with a bad idea and a heat source. Lin printed the graph that told the story in Kinder ink. Time versus release with a slope a juror could feel. She paper-clipped it to Chemicote's italic, do not acidify, and set them beside Arden's email about unscrutinized chemistry. 3 pages, 3 points of a triangle, 1 room stuck in the middle. She went back to interview 3 with the stack. Brandt and his counsel looked like men who had run out of chairs to be comfortable in. You ordered ferrocyanide thrice, Lin said, laying the invoices in a row like spread cards. For glazed tricks, that's fine until you put it under acid and heat. You bought citric. You bought a lamp. Your drain trap remembers blue. Your beaker remembers acid. Your note says citric plus heat equals breath. The breath was someone else's last. Brandt said nothing. His counsel said, we dispute the inference, as if refusing gravity on principle. You won't dispute purchase histories, Lin said, nor the lot numbers, nor the locker pickup, nor that your card paid for personal stock, nor that the kitchen stock arrived 2 days before Mr. Arden died. He reached for a deflection that had worked for him before. Technique as shield. Ferrocyanide is used by professionals, he said, in controlled conditions. In your hands, Lin said. It met citric acid and a heat lamp, and then it met a capsule and a glass of wine. You tightened a window to 1.5 minutes and trusted technique to be an alibi. It's evidence. He looked at his hands. They did not confess. They didn't have to. The paper was speaking. By evening, Lin's chain from source to sip could carry itself without her. Chemicote receiving Brandt's shelf citric plus heat lamp beaker drain trap capsule raft. Each step had a piece of proof that could sit on an easel and not blush. She stopped at the piano on her way out, touched the closed lid like a benediction to silence, and let the day exhale. On her phone, a message from the prosecutor blinked. Asterisk route is good. Let's tie timing with bodies. Asterisk. Timing was the last bolt to tighten before the whole chassis could drive. 92 seconds had to become a metronome that everyone could hear. Cameras tell one truth. Heat tells another. People's legs tell their own. She had them all. Now she needed to lay them in a row and make them point to a hand. The poison had a birth certificate. Ferrocyanide purchased, acidified, heated. A beaker's blue, a drain's memory, a note that confused gentle for safe. The chain ran to Brandt's hands. Next came the clock, those 92 seconds between pairing and sip, and the small physics of reach, cooling, and a single left glove. Time doesn't confess. It aligns. Sarah Lynn took every clock the Red Ledger owned, service logs, CCTV stamps, a thermal monitor someone had installed to save on utilities and accidentally saved for homicide, and put them on the same line. Start at the pairing call, she said, standing with Lydia in the empty room as if recreating a seance for electricity. 20 hours, 46 minutes, and 10 seconds. Lydia nodded, a metronome with manners. Pastry rang the bell. For Arden. I was at the door with the Olsons. Victor, Lynn said. The sommelier joined them, the club's hush clinging to him like a uniform he wasn't yet permitted to take off. Mr. and Mrs. Nyman detained me, he said, the verb gentle to hide resentment. I can quote you their exact tasting notes if you wish. I don't, Lynn said. I need where your feet stood. Here, he said, marking the floor with a toe. A tape X in blue already said the same. Nora? Lynn asked. The busser pointed to the foretop she'd been resetting. There, she said, quiet. Lynn spread the printouts on Arden's table, each page a square of the night. Frame-by-frame stills from the past camera. The thermal map. The side hallway cam where you saw nobody until you realized the emptiness was an alibi. She taped a strip of paper at eye level on the pass and wrote the times in a 10-point hand. 10, 41, 49, 53. She let the room memorize the cadence. At 20:46:41, a plate slid to the edge of the pass. 2 dark buttons of chocolate set on a white saucer like punctuation marks at the end of a life. At 20:47:09, a left forearm entered the pass frame. The cuff was chef's whites, the arm's vector unmistakable. The hand dropped below the counter edge. The glass itself lived in that blind zone that makes lawyers stand taller at counsel tables. At 20:47:12, the thermal camera registered a subtle cool signature at the glass's meniscus. A bloom that looked like breath against a window and then vanished. Reed had already turned the plume into numbers. A small evaporative dip where a surface had been briefly disturbed. You could call it poetry, you would be right and wrong. At 20:47:13, the pass cam caught Chef Brandt pivoting back into frame. Left hand shaking once, fingers flexing unconsciously. Right hand still gloved, piping bag ready for show. At 20:49:00, Henry Arden turned from the donors he was ignoring toward the glass he was not. He lifted it by the stem, good student of the room's rules, and took what his tasting card would have called the third sip. At 20:53, XX, depending on which body's truth you preferred, CCTV, EMS tone out, the time it takes to stand, Arden sagged. The chair took the sag and then surrendered it to the floor. Lynn pointed at the strip of paper. Numbers that behave, she said. Now we make bodies match them. The pianist, Alice, returned to her stool like a witness called back for a single clarifying bar. Show me your sight line at 09, Lynn asked. Alice angled her bench. I saw the arm, she said, the words steady now that grief had metabolized into narrative. Left through the pass, fingers together, not grabbing, pressing. Speed, Lynn asked. Quick, Alice said, like a button that you already know by heart. Lynn walked to the service bin Nora had used. You said you heard a glove snap. After the plate slid, Nora said. Before Mr. Arden drank. I picked a glove up off the floor and put it in the bin. It was a left. The right was still on Chef Brandt's hand when he plated something else. Thermal plume says, 12, Reed added from the doorway, having learned the art of appearing exactly when a sentence needed a number. Surface cooling consistent with a brief disturbance. Not definitive alone, but it sits inside our window like it applied for a job. Ventilation pattern? Lynn asked. HVAC register over the pass was flowing low, Reed said. Direction would push any evaporative cool toward the camera's right. The plume leans right. Wind tells the same story as the hand. Lynn nodded once. We'll put that on a slide and beg the judge to enjoy physics. They ran the wedding march of service again. The pour at 45, the toast to no one, the turn of a head, the unattended glass. 2 runners crossed behind Arden's chair and never touched the table. Lydia's hands never came closer than the base of a nearby candle. Victor's gloves stayed on his stems. Brandt's left hand, twice over the night, reached into the dining room. Once for the pairing, once for a theatrical flourish at another table earlier in the service. He was a man who believed in reach. In the staff corridor, Lynn and a patrol officer watched a second camera that had looked only proper until now. At 20:46:58, Chef Brandt stepped into frame at the sink, his right glove still on. He stripped the left glove off with a practiced roll that made the nitrile turn like a snake and die. He pumped wintergreen into a bare palm, rubbed, reached for a new glove, paused, and turned back toward the pass with the bare hand carried like a secret. Sequence writes itself, Lynn said. Left glove off, bomb on, bare hand back to the pass. Press, twist, release. Back in the lab, Reed put the plume into a model and made a chart with 3 lines: theory, control, scene. Theory predicted a small cooling when a warmer finger briefly displaced liquid and increased local evaporation. Control recreated the plume with Prieto's thumb in a test glass under the same vent. Scene gave a whisper identical in shape, smaller in amplitude because it had happened further from the thermal sensor. Reed captioned it in a style that would bore the jury just enough to trust him. Quan, unwilling to leave even an obvious inference unfed, measured cyanide concentration at the air, liquid interface in controls touched just before spiking with a capsule. Her numbers behaved like a good dog. Elevated at the interface immediately after rupture, sloped down with diffusion, a curve that made Arden's short onset look less like magic and more like flow. Clock agrees with chemistry, she said to Lin. Surface insult at 12, sip at 49, collapse at 53. No miracles, just kinetics that decided to be rude. Lin took the glove count to its petty conclusion. The pastry glove box had 19 complete pairs and one single right glove. The bin held a single left. The inventory from receiving brand, size, lot matched all of them. Little proofs ride bigger ones like barnacles. Juries love barnacles when they stick in tidy rows. Defense would say anyone could have reached. Lin rebutted herself in advance. Who else had reason to? Who else knew that gloves protect glass but not liquid? Who else had capsules? Who else had a left-hand scar that drew a V across 3 ridges we lifted from the wine? Who else ordered ferrocyanide twice at work and once at a locker? Still, she staged the other ways to touch a wine glass for the jury. Nora's cloth on the bowl, no bare contact. Victor's gloved pinch on the stem, no bowl contact. Lydia's base placement, no rim. She filmed short demonstrations with Reed's camera, overlaid arrows and times, and printed stills that looked like instructions for a science kit a child would never be allowed to open. Then she stripped the room of variables. At 20:46:10, the pairing call places Brandt within arm's reach of the pass. At 41, the plate slides. At 58, brand bomb on his left hand. At 12, plume at the wine. No one else is within touching range of Arden's table except a hand from the pass. The choreography snapped shut on a hinge. She took it to Brandt in interview 3 and laid the clockwork down. You had 92 seconds, she said. A minute and a half where no one watched the one thing that moved. I can tell a jury where your hands were at 58 and 12 and 49 and 53. I can show them thermal and oil and dye and bomb and bloom. I can show them a glove short of its partner and a drain full of blue. He examined the strip of paper with the times on it, as if the digits might blink and correct themselves. They didn't. You like drama, he said finally. Not as much as you, Lin said. I prefer endings. His counsel put a hand on his arm, the universal signal for don't. Brandt obeyed this time. Silence sat down and crossed its legs. Lin left him to it and made one last call to EMS to lock the human clock. Dispatch log opened at 21:06, arrival at 21:11. Monitor noted no electrical activity, pupils fixed. The medical examiner's quant on cyanide made the numbers walk in step. On a separate board, she wrote a small equation in print big enough for the back row. Press, twist release plus cyanide at interface plus sip, 3, collapse, 4 minutes. She capped the marker so it wouldn't dry out on the way to court. When she returned to the red ledger for the final walkthrough, Lydia was closing the ledger on a night that would never balance. The piano lid was up. Alice ran a slow scale like a benediction for rooms that had learned a lesson they didn't ask for. Victor polished a glass by reflex with a cloth he would throw away afterward. Nora stared at the pass as if it were a stage that had hosted the wrong play. You'll open again, Lin said to Lydia. We will, Lydia said, with fewer tricks. Keep the mirrors for the bathrooms, Lin said. They lie less. On her way out, she paused by Arden's table, empty except for a small tent of evidence tape that had once protected a miracle that turned out to be physics. The numbers on her strip were still visible at the pass. 10, 41, 12, 49, 53. The room had learned to hear them. Back at the squad, the prosecutor waited with a legal pad and an expression like a tune-up. We can charge, he said. But if we're going to make this sing, I want him to talk. He will, Lynn said. Not to us yet. But he will, because technique isn't an alibi and time isn't a lawyer. She collected the binders, source, route, delivery, clock, and added a fifth tab she hadn't needed until now, voice. Inside it she slid the interview notes and the photographs of the left glove, the bomb, the V-scar, and the ridge map that made metaphors unnecessary. The last page was blank for now. It waited for words that would arrive after a chair scraped and a suspect decided to turn technique into a story. The window was down to seconds and the physics were fluent. All that remained was the human part, an interview to break pride on the edge of evidence, and the quiet act of putting ink where a thumb had once put oil. Interview rooms under police fluorescence have a tone that peels the finish off confidence. Chef Leo Brandt came in behind his counsel with his chin up and his shoulders squared, the deadpan of a professional who has survived heat. Sarah Lynn sat with a stack of binders and a cardboard banker's box that looked like it had eaten a smaller chef. Record is on, she said, and the little red LED agreed. Brandt's lawyer said their names for the tape, the way magic tricks name the handkerchief before it burns. Lynn opened the first binder with the courtesy you reserve for religion. Source, Chemicode orders, locker pickup stills. The card with the last 48134. She didn't narrate. She let pages make their small sounds. We've been over your purchases, she said, turning the binder so Brandt could read the italics on the MSDS. Do not acidify. You ordered ferrocyanide for mirror effects, twice to the restaurant, once to a locker. You bought citric acid and a heat lamp. Your drain trap remembers blue. Your beaker remembers pH 2.5. Brandt tipped a knuckle against the table, a drummer counting a silent bar. His counsel put a fingertip on the pad of a legal pen and didn't write. Lynn opened delivery. Size, 0 capsule tray. The zip-bagged clear hemispheres like dragonfly wings caught mid-birth. The Cambro labeled pearls. Not for service. You had empty capsules. We found shreds of high-bloom gelatin between ridges in an oil film lifted from a dead man's wine. Torn edges took wine dye, which means rupture at the surface. He feigned a yawn with his eyes only. It was a good performance for the tired half of the jury that doesn't like science until it hurts someone they know. She opened clock, a strip of paper with 20:46:10, pairing call, 41, plate, 58, hand wash, bomb, 12, thermal plume at the rim, 49, sip, 53, collapse. 92 seconds, she said. You turned technique into a window. He held his breath like a man who knows how to temper chocolate, counting backwards through heat. Lynn turned the last binder, voice, and slid out a pair of photographs. The unmirrored ridge map from the raft with flags in red and the high-resolution exemplar of Brandt's inked left thumb. She placed them side by side, then laid a transparency that bore Reed's concordance marks. The V-shaped ridge break bisected 3 lines in both. 12 concordant minutiae, then 14. Then she stopped because she'd already decided not to gild. Ridge skin is ridge skin, she said. Substrate is novel. Pattern is not. His counsel leaned in, then leaned back, then half rose. We object to the characterization, he told the ceiling, because the ceiling was not a judge. We haven't had an independent examiner. You will, Lynn said, and she will tell you the same thing mine just did. The mirror correction is valid, the fiducials are honest, the minutiae are clean. We ran blind controls. None of them cluster with your client. His does. She took one more thing out of the banker's box, something that looked like a craft store toy until you read what it made. A clear tumbler, water dyed a sober red, a size 0 capsule filled with a grainy sugar stand-in for polite courtrooms, a PDMS lift in a frame, and 2 cameras on tripods already aimed. She set the tumbler in the center, checked the cross-polarizers out of habit, and nodded to Reed through the glass. He was on the other side of the observation window, happy to be the pair of hands that didn't talk. Demonstrative only, Lynn said for the record. No poison, no cyanide, a capsule made of high-bloom gelatin filled with sugar. The maneuver, press, twist, release. Counsel started to object in principle. Lin gave him the courtesy of a glance that reminded him what demonstrative means. He subsided, professionally offended, which is still permission. Lin pointed at the water's surface. Gloves don't print. Surface does. Watch. Through the glass, Reed touched the dyed water with his left thumb, as if silencing a small instrument. Press, twist, release. The camera clicked once, then a second time. The raft bloomed, a rainbow sheen etched with ridges. He lifted a PDMS film and let it kiss the surface. He peeled it away and walked it to the microscope with the pride of a beekeeper bearing comb. Lin slid the fresh lift under a side camera that fed a monitor in the room. On screen, the loops glowed, the minutiae like intersections in a city you could memorize. She didn't say all we did here we did there with lethal consequences. She let the geometry say it. The silence laid down its knife edge. Counsel shifted. Demonstrative is not the scene, he said. No, Lin agreed. But your client's bomb is. It's in the raft. Methyl salicylate. This jar. She tapped the bag tube labeled bomb. Brandt. Sings the same peak as the oil we lifted from Mr. Arden's wine. The sommelier's glove doesn't. The busser's cloth doesn't. Your client's hand does. Brandt had been looking only at the glass. He lifted his left hand off his knee and set it on the table. The scar was pale, the V shallow. A knife that had gone wrong in a different kitchen on a different day. He traced it with his right index finger once, a movement so unconscious Lin wanted to thank the universe for letting humans be human in rooms with microphones. Mr. Brandt, she said softly, and didn't add chef because cooks understand when honorifics become sarcasm. You know technique. You know bloom numbers. You know surface tension. You know how to move in a room while eyes are elsewhere. I'm not asking you to explain chemistry. I'm asking you to explain why. He looked over at the glass again, at the raft on the monitor, at the scar on his own thumb, and then at Lin. Whatever calculation he did with his pride came out with a remainder. He was going to shut me down, he said, and Counsel grabbed his sleeve mid-verb. Brandt shook his hand off. He sent the emails you have. He liked to do it where people could see. He had a way of making demands that dressed up as concern. I am not. He struggled for a word that wouldn't be used against him. Failed, settled on the truth's shortest version. I am not compliant by nature. Did you intend to kill Henry Arden? Lin asked, voice flat on purpose. I intended to make him ill, he said, too quickly. To interrupt his evening. To give him a lesson. To make him... He groped for an adjective, found one with a child's teeth still in it. Humble. Cyanide doesn't teach humility, Lin said. It teaches endings. He swallowed. Counsel tried to stop the bleeding with law. We're going to take a break, he said, standing. Detective, any further questions can be directed through me. We're still rolling, Lin said. We can roll through your break. Counsel glared at the invisible judge. Brandt's eyes were fixed on the transparency overlay, as if it were an instruction sheet for a dessert he'd finally plated correctly and come to regret. I didn't splash, he said to the paper, not to the room. I didn't want anyone to see. I pressed. I twisted. The seam gave. I could feel it. There was a dryness after, like when you scrape chocolate and the curl breaks. It was... He hated himself for the word and said it anyway. Clean. Counsel hissed his name. He ignored it. Where did you learn the route? Lin asked. Ferrocyanide to free cyanide. Same place you did, he said. A strip of arrogance left in the wrapper. The internet. A forum for mirror glazes. People warn you. People dare you. I acidified. The heat lamp did the rest. I tested a cotton swab over the beaker and the tube darkened. Numbers behave if you ask them nicely. And you thought a capsule would keep the mess off the glass, Lin said. It did. It didn't keep the mess off the one thing that moved. He closed his eyes. For a second, all the left-handed virtuosity drained out of his posture and left an ordinary man who had done something irretrievable with skill. Your lift, he said. It's really my thumb? 14 concordant points, Lin said. And a V-scar that's been flirting with you since the day you cut it. You pressed at 20:47:12. Mr. Arden sipped at 49. He collapsed at 53. The cyanide in his blood agrees with the clock. He exhaled. It didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like the sound a room makes when the last guest leaves. "Counsel," Lynn said, "would you like your client to stop talking?" "I would," he said. Leo, stop. Brant stopped. Pride is obedient when it runs out of territory. Lynn clicked the demonstrative kit apart with small, deliberate noises and put every piece back in the banker's box. She closed the binders, one by one, and set a single sheet atop the stack. Voluntary statement, Leo Brant. She did not slide it over. She let counsel ask for it. In the corridor afterward, the prosecutor met her with eyebrows raised as if they were fishing lures. "We have a statement?" he asked. "We have enough without it," Lynn said. "We have the words press and twist and seam, and we have didn't splash and clean. We have the admission he acidified and tested. We have motive that plays like a reel. If he gives more, fine. If not, we have a kitchen's worth." "You'll survive Daubert," he said. "Reed will," Lynn said. "I'll bring pictures and nouns." She went back to the tasting room one last time before the paperwork turned the case into a train schedule. Lydia stood at the pass with a measuring tape, as if smaller rectangles made safer food. "We're removing the pass," Lydia said, half to herself, half to a room that had not yet forgiven itself. "Or putting glass in. Something. Passes don't kill," Lynn said. "People do. Keep the pass if you like. Keep the mirrors if you must. Keep fewer men who think technique is an alibi." Lydia nodded, brittle in a way that would never show at service. On her way out, Lynn looked at her notebook where she'd written the line at the beginning. "If it floats, photograph it." She added a second line underneath, the kind of note you don't say aloud because you don't need to. "If it sings, charge it." The paperwork tide came in, charges drafted, ***, murder, ***, administration of poison, tampering with food, premeditation by capsule prep and chemistry rehearsal. The chain of custody forms marched under her pen. Reed sent her the final overlay with the V-scar tagged in a way jurors would remember even when they pretended not to. Kwan sent the graph where ferrocyanide became a worse thing under acid and light. The EMS dispatch time slotted into the timeline like a rivet. Defense wanted a Fry hearing. They got Daubert instead and a roomful of replication. Before the arraignment, Lynn stood at the club's door looking up at the brass handle whose polish had not yet learned about grief. Inside, Alice let her hands rest on the keys with all the patience of someone who knows silence is also music. Victor rinsed glasses. Nora folded linen. Lydia rewrote the service script. "What now?" Reed asked at her shoulder. "Now we say it slowly," Lynn said, "and then we let 12 people decide how much they believed before we opened our mouths." He nodded and went back to his instruments, which never asked to be believed because they never lied. The confession had edges and omissions, but the narrative had enough. A press, a twist, a seam. Intent dressed as technique. With identity, mechanism, route, and clock aligned, Lynn walked the case to court, where novelty would become evidence and a surface would be asked to testify. They called it a Daubert hearing because Fry felt too old for a fingerprint that floated. Judge Brennerman wore patience like a robe over her robe and reminded both tables that novelty was not a synonym for nonsense. Sarah Lynn sat behind the prosecutor with the binders she had named like rooms in a house. Source, route, delivery, clock, voice. In the well, a clear display case held a Bordeaux glass under a bell jar that made jurors crane a little. The surface inside was only wine now and wouldn't be asked to speak. The photographs would do the talking. The defense opened with a smile he'd filed down to look like skepticism. "Your Honor, the people intend to prove identity through a ridge pattern imaged not on glass or metal but on a liquid. We submit the method lacks general acceptance, is vulnerable to optical illusions, and is, frankly, a magic trick." "Magic tricks don't leave chains of custody," Brennerman said. "Proceed." Owen Reed took the stand with a copy of his own protocol printed on paper thick enough to stop a dart. He spoke like he wrote software. Each step named, each assumption declared, each correction justified before it was used. He walked the court through cross-polarized light to kill specular glare. The micrometer focus rail, so depth is not a rumor. The PDMS lift, gentler than breath, and the mirror correction that tracked microbubbles as fiducials. So the geometry tells the truth about left and right. The defense tried the word distortion 3 ways. Reed let it pass and then explained capillary flow fields as if discussing the shape of downtown traffic at 5 o'clock. He put up the blind test dendrogram and let it look boring. He overlaid the ridge map from the raft with Chef Brandt's inked left thumb and let the flags count themselves. Ridge endings, bifurcations, the V-scar bisecting 3 lines the way a scar always remembers where it has been. He used 12 when asked for a comfortable number, 14 when given more time, and did not say 16 because he liked jurors who trusted restraint. Substrate novel, the defense insisted. How can we be sure we're not seeing interference patterns, or rainbow sheen, or... Because interference has no minutiae, Reed said. It does not end and fork like skin. It does not carry a scar through 3 ridges and keep the spacing honest. And we reproduced the effect with 5 volunteers, none of whom matched our unknown. We reproduced it again with the defendant's own thumb under controlled conditions. The same light, the same lift, the same analysis, different geometry every time except where it shouldn't be. Kwan followed, fluent in chemistry without the Latin. She showed the cyanide numbers with the politeness of a graph that understood tragedy. She held up Chemicote's brochure, *** edible mirror effects ***, and then the MSDS the company prints because someone once got sued. Do not acidify. She made an acid bath in words, sat it under a heat lamp with a wattage a jury remembered from kitchens, and gave the room hydrogen cyanide in numbers and caution. She pointed to the drain trap Prussian blue and the beaker at pH 2.5 and the squeeze bottle labeled citric. She said gentle doesn't mean safe the way a mother says no. The defense's expert was competent, smooth, and fond of the phrase optical artifact. He conceded under Lynn's prosecutor's cross that artifacts don't produce concordant minutiae at the same locations as a scar on a suspect's thumb. He conceded that methyl salicylate doesn't leap into wine from no place at all. He conceded, after a courteous resurrection, that the lab's reconstruction of ferrocyanide conversion would be difficult to call benign. Judge Brennerman held her pen up like a metronome. The court finds the methodology for imaging and lifting a lipid film from a liquid surface to be reliable and relevant. It is supported by replication, controls, and a clear error correction model. The novelty is in the substrate, not in the fingerprint. The motion to exclude is denied. The jury will hear it. 12 people heard it. They heard Lydia explain service choreography like a ballet teacher in a hurricane. They heard Nora say one glove and then left and mangle a little the way truth likes to. They heard Victor confess to being detained by donors and surrender a pinch of shame. They heard Alice describe a hand as if it were a cord. Left, press, quick, done. They saw the strip of timing numbers, ***, 10 ***, 41, 58, 12, 49, 53, fixed to a diagram of the room until the cadence printed itself behind their eyes. They watched the thermal plume arrive in false color like a sigh and go. They watched the glove snap in the corridor on a camera that had never expected to matter. They smelled wintergreen when Kwan unsealed the bomb. A courtroom trick that was not a trick. The defense tried pride. Technique, he said, and let it mean alibi. He tried no prints on glass, as if the surface that moved weren't a surface at all. He tried food safe, and Kwan answered safe in the cage until the jurors' faces made it clear the word had lost the argument. In closing, the prosecutor refrained from poetry and quoted a grocery list. Gloves, capsules, beakers, bomb. Capsules crossed out. He held up the Cambro-labeled pearls, not for service, and let the laugh it earned die in the throat it deserved. He pointed to the ridge map and asked the jury to imagine a scar forgetting where it is. No one could. The jury went out with the thin look of people who have already decided. They came back before the bailiff had forgiven his coffee. Guilty, their forewoman said, on all counts: murder, administration of poison, tampering with food. ***, the judge thanked them and made a note that sounded like a mercy but was only paper. At sentencing, the room learned what substantial feels like when it lands. Brandt did not give a speech. pride rarely survives contact with the calendar. His counsel filed notices the way shipwreck survivors collect flotsam. Lynn felt nothing that would admit a name. The case file grew a spine. The exhibits found their sleeves. The Bordeaux glass, long since rinsed into ordinary, returned to the property room and then to a box labeled with the case number and the kind of warning no one would read. On a quiet afternoon after the verdict, Lynn walked the block behind the Philharmonic where a brass handle still advertised discretion. The red ledger was open again. Lydia had kept the pass and added a pane of glass that made reaching a premeditated act. Victor polished with gloves he hated but had learned to love. Nora had stopped flinching at the sound of nitrile. Alice played a low run in a minor key and did not watch the pass. She watched her hands and let them be steady. Lydia met Lynn at the door with a professional smile and a private person's gratitude. "We changed the hand bomb rule," she said. "Keep it," Lynn said. "That rule helps more rooms than mine." Lydia hesitated. "If you'd like to sit another night," Lynn said. "I still hear numbers when I see your chairs." Outside, the rain had polished the alley to a mirror. Lynn stood under a fire escape and wrote one line in her notebook and then another, because it helps to have the last words even if you never say them into a microphone. No miracles, just physics that refuses to be bullied. No ghosts, just bloom numbers and a thumb that mistook technique for permission. Back at the squad, the banker's box had one job left. Lynn slid the last exhibit into its plastic and closed the lid. On the file tab she printed Prince, liquid, in block letters. Beneath it, on the inside flap where only she would ever see it again, she wrote the margin note she'd said once to a room made of crystal and money. "If it floats, photograph it." She put the box on the shelf. The shelf held its breath and then didn't. Across the bullpen, Reed waved a jar at her. "Proofing coffee," he said. "Want to bet I can detect wintergreen at 5 parts per billion?" "Not today," she said. "Today we have enough." Quan came by with a stapled packet of numbers freshly corrected and useless now except to memory. "Do you ever want the next one to be ordinary?" she asked. "No," Lynn said, "but I'll take one where nothing moves." She stepped to the window. The city sharpened in the rain until edges made more sense than faces. Somewhere a room rehearsed service, and somewhere else someone was writing a threat that sounded generous. The world's surface tension held for another day. Case closed. No miracles, just patience, physics, and a thumb that forgot what water remembers. That was a finger on the Merlot, a case that began with a glass polish spotless, and ended with a fingerprint that chose to float instead of fade. What looked like a miracle turned out to be physics, patience, and a scar that never forgot where it belonged. At Somnolent Conspiracies, we believe the smallest traces tell the loudest stories. A ridge in a rainbow sheen, a whisper of wintergreen, the 92 seconds nobody thought to guard. If you stayed with us through every step of this investigation, thank you. Your time and attention keep these long nights of deduction alive. Please remember to subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a like if you want more journeys into crimes where evidence hides in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes. Until the next case, stay curious, stay observant, and never forget, even the quietest surface remembers more than it shows.